I've camped all over the western United States. Mountains that creak under snow, deserts that hum at midnight, coastlines that breathe mist and salt through the cracked windows of our rig. But I never expected Eastern Oregon, that stretch of no man's land near the Snake River, to be the place that nearly unraveled everything I thought I knew about the wilderness, or about myself. It started as most good trips do, with a map and a gut feeling. My name's Danny. I'm 38. My wife, June, is 36. We'd been living full-time in our RV for nearly 2 years when we found that patch of Bureau of Land Management land outside of Hell's Canyon. We'd gotten good at dodging the crowds and finding solitude. But there's a difference between solitude and isolation. That land near the Snake didn't feel like it had been waiting for us. It felt like it had forgotten people even existed. The road off the highway was gravel but well-packed. June had found it in some obscure off-grid camping forum, just coordinates and a photo of a bluff above the river with the words, "Best sunrise in Oregon, totally untouched, no cell, no people." That last part should have been our warning. No people. The spot was almost half a mile down a dusty trail that wound between low sagebrush and the red knuckles of volcanic rock. The air smelled metallic, like dried blood and scorched grass. A few charred fence posts leaned like broken teeth along the ridge, remnants of an old boundary, maybe. There was no signage, no cattle, just the sound of the wind. That hard inland wind that flattens grass in waves and whispers to itself in tongues you've never heard before. We parked the rig near the edge of the bluff and set up for what we figured would be a few quiet days. We'd learned to trust these moments of disconnection, that sacred silence after you shut off the engine, when the only thing left is sky and land and your own breath. That evening we built a small fire, watched the golden light move across the canyon, and tried to name the constellations as the sky fell into night. But I didn't sleep. It was subtle at first. Just the sense that something in the dark didn't want to be still. I kept hearing things. Not animals, not coyotes or nightbirds, but something distant, rhythmic, like drumming, faint and far off, but wrong in its pattern, too steady to be wind, too off-tempo to be human. I didn't mention it to June. She'd had a hard enough week already. We'd just come off a bad experience with another couple in a Utah campground who tried to siphon our water and leave in the night. We were both exhausted. I didn't want to stir up fear that might not be there, but by the next morning, I couldn't ignore it. There were prints in the dirt behind the RV. Not animal, not boot treads. Circles. Perfect circles, maybe the size of dinner plates, pressed shallow into the dry dust in a wide arc, almost like someone had dragged a barrel, or no, not dragged. They were too precise, too deliberate. I showed them to June. She laughed it off. Maybe kids, native ceremonial thing, like crop circles but older. We both knew that didn't make sense. There wasn't a house or ranch for 10 miles, and no one in their right mind would haul ceremonial anything up this godforsaken trail just to mess with two sunburned boondockers. Still, we let it go. That's what you do when you live in an RV. You let things go, the strange, the unexplained, the minor discomforts, because if you let them build up, you'll never sleep again. You'll never stop moving. But the land didn't want to let go of us. That afternoon, we went for a walk. The bluff overlooked a dry riverbed maybe 100 feet below. Snake River was running lower than normal that year, and the braided channels carved strange paths through the canyon walls. As we hiked down, the heat pressed hard against our skin, and the air was thick with that iron dust smell again. Every few minutes, I thought I heard the sound of someone walking behind us, just a beat off from our own footsteps. But every time I turned, there was nothing, until we found the circle. It was buried in the reeds near the base of a narrow ravine, half covered in dust and pale grass. At first, I thought it was just an old fire pit, a ring of stones maybe 6 feet across, but when I knelt and brushed away the dirt, I saw that it wasn't a ring of stones. It was one stone, a single piece of basalt, dark and porous, carved in a perfect circle and inset with markings I didn't recognize. Not letters, not symbols, just impressions. Depressions like finger holes or maybe sockets for something once placed inside them. June crouched beside me. This looks old. Really old. Like a burial site? I asked. My voice was too loud. It bounced off the walls of the ravine like a stone thrown into still water. She didn't answer right away. Then, no. I don't know. It doesn't feel like a grave. It feels like a door. I should have stopped there. We both should have walked away. But I couldn't. There was something inside me, some stupid part of my brain wired for puzzles, for curiosity, for unlocking things that should stay closed, that made me press my fingers into one of the shallow depressions on the stone. It shifted. Just a little. A scrape, like rock against rock, low and dry and final. The circle moved maybe half an inch and then stopped. I pulled my hand back. June stood up fast. Don't. But it was already done. The wind picked up suddenly, roaring down the ravine like a living thing. Dust blasted across our faces, and we turned away coughing. When I looked back, the circle was still, unmoved, but the temperature had dropped by at least 10 degrees. And then from somewhere behind us, we heard it, a soft exhale, not human, not animal, just breath, long and hollow, like the land itself was remembering how to breathe. We didn't run, not yet. We climbed back up the trail in silence, each step heavier than the last. When we reached the RV, the sun was dipping low, casting long black shadows across the scrub and stone. That night, the drumming came back, louder, closer, and something stood outside our RV and whispered our names. The first time I heard it, I thought I was dreaming. You know that fog between waking and sleep where your thoughts don't quite belong to you? That's where I was when the whisper came. Danny, it was right outside my window. Low, intimate, almost kind, but too clear to be my imagination. Then again, June. The voice was wrong. It was her name, but it wasn't said like how people say names. It was shaped differently, as if the word had been learned phonetically by someone who didn't understand what it meant. Only that saying it would get your attention. I bolted upright in bed. The RV was dark. Too dark, like the air itself was heavy with something that swallowed light. I fumbled for the switch and snapped on the battery-powered lamp overhead. The inside of the rig lit up in a pale yellow hue, and for a second I felt the kind of false security that light gives you in the wild. June stirred beside me, then sat up. "You heard it too?" she whispered. I nodded slowly. We stayed like that for a long time, listening, waiting. The whisper didn't come again, not in words, but the drumming returned. It was faint at first, like fingers tapping on a countertop far away, then louder, with rhythm, like something ancient and practiced. I moved to the front of the RV and cracked the curtain just enough to look out through the windshield. There was no one there, no lights, no movement. But something had changed. The prints were back, those same circular impressions, now in a perfect ring around the RV, like we were being surrounded, like the ground itself had been pressed by something heavy and deliberate in the night. "Get dressed," I told June, and she didn't argue. We didn't turn on the headlights when we left. I didn't want to draw attention, not that I had a clue what we were trying to avoid. I just knew we had to get off that ridge. Back to asphalt, back to anything resembling normal. But the trail down was different this time. The gravel seemed softer, like the ground was breathing beneath us, and the GPS froze halfway out, refusing to update, refusing to believe we were moving. I drove 10 miles before we found a pull-off near the edge of a cow pasture with enough moonlight to feel real again. We sat in silence. I looked over at June, who was pale and sweating even though the air had turned cold. "Why did we touch it?" she asked. I didn't have an answer. In the morning, we made the mistake of going back. We told ourselves it was for closure, that we'd just take a quick look, confirm we weren't crazy, and then leave for good. But that wasn't the truth. The truth was something inside us needed to see it again. Not out of curiosity, not even guilt. It was a pull, like gravity, like an anchor line dropped into the earth and fastened to our bones. The RV stayed parked at the bottom of the ridge while we walked in on foot. There were no birds, No insects, just wind through the grass and that sickly warm smell again, like sun-baked rot and scorched hair. When we reached the burial circle, the stone was gone. Gone. The pit where it had rested was still there, a shallow depression in the earth like something had risen out of it. Around the edges, the reeds had turned black, burned, but there was no ash, no smoke. Just this silent aftermath like something sacred had been disturbed. June backed away, shaking her head. This wasn't just a grave. She didn't finish the sentence, because just then I saw something in the dirt, a line of small stones arranged in a spiral, leading away from the depression and into the brush, almost like a path. I should have walked away. I should have pulled her with me and left that canyon for good. But we followed it. I can't explain why. Every step felt like a betrayal of instinct. Like walking into a storm you already know will take the roof off your house. But I had to see. I had to understand. The path wound through low brush and twisted pine into a gully I hadn't noticed before. It was narrow and sunless, even at midday, with walls made of fractured shale that looked like ancient bone. And at the end of it, in a hollowed-out alcove beneath the roots of a leaning cedar, we found the second circle. This one wasn't stone, it was made of bones. Not animal bones. Human. Arranged in a spiral, just like the stones, with a single dark feather, long and oily, planted in the center. We didn't speak. We didn't move. Because just then, the wind stopped. Completely. No rustle. No sound. Just absolute stillness, and then we heard the breath again. Not near us. Not behind. Beneath. It came from under the ground, slow, wet, like something enormous exhaling from a long sleep. The dirt trembled, the bones rattled once, lightly, like wind chimes before a storm. And then, from the center of the circle, a hand emerged. Thin. Gray. Not alive. The fingers moved like they were searching for something. For purchase. For memory. For flesh. The ground cracked. The roots of the cedar twisted violently like nerves on fire. June screamed, and it snapped me out of my trance. We ran. No hesitation, no second look, just pure survival. We ran until our chests felt like they would tear open, until our shoes bled and our throats were raw from the cold air. We didn't stop until we reached the RV, and even then we didn't speak for hours. That night, we didn't sleep, not because we heard anything new, not because the whispers came back, though they did just after midnight in voices that were no longer trying to mimic human tones. But because something had changed in us. We didn't just disturb something ancient, we invited it, and it followed. Not on foot, not through tracks or scent, through memory, through name. We left Snake River at first light, didn't eat, didn't change, just pulled up the leveling blocks, slammed the door and took off, gravel flying behind us like dust from a burial shroud. I remember gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles cracked. June sat next to me, arms wrapped tight across her chest, eyes glued to the passenger side mirror like she expected something to follow, not behind us but alongside, just out of view. And honestly, I felt it too. That weight, that presence. The farther we drove, the more that sense of being watched twisted into something deeper. Not fear, not exactly. It was dread tied to something older than the road beneath our tires. I couldn't shake the thought that whatever we'd touched wasn't tied to the land, but to us. That night, we parked at a public RV campground near Boise. Busy, normal, loud, with kids and diesel engines and propane stoves. We thought being around people would help, ground us, maybe even make us laugh at ourselves. Like, what were we thinking? Chasing old rocks and ghost stories? But it didn't help, because the moment we opened the RV door, something smelled wrong. Rotten sagebrush. Burnt hair. That same scent we'd first noticed near the stone circle. But we were miles away, dozens of miles. That smell had no business being here. I checked the undercarriage. Nothing. No dead animal, no leaking fluids, nothing hanging from the frame. But when I stepped out into the gravel and turned to look at the side of the rig, my breath caught in my throat. There were marks on the aluminum, faint, like soot or ash had been dragged across the paneling. They weren't scratches. They weren't handprints. They were circles. Dozens of them, interlocking, overlapping. The exact same size as the ones we'd seen in the dirt. "Danny," June called from inside, her voice thin. "You need to come look at this." I walked in. She was standing near the fridge, staring down at the kitchen table, and when I followed her gaze, I saw them. Small piles of black dirt, 3 of them, each no bigger than a handful, arranged in a triangle on the surface of our formica table. "How did this get in here?" she asked. The windows were shut. The door had been locked. Nothing made sense. But deep down, I already knew it wasn't just a haunting. It wasn't just some angry spirit pissed off about a broken seal. We'd been claimed, not in a theatrical horror movie sense, claimed in the way a canyon claims a scream, quietly, permanently. That night, we argued. First out of fear, then out of desperation. June wanted to drive straight to a tribal center, find someone who understood what we'd disturbed, someone who could, I don't know, cleanse us, free us. But I was too stubborn, too proud, too deep in denial. I didn't believe in rituals. I didn't believe in curses. I believed in geology and psychology. My fear still had to wear a mask, and it cost us because that night, something got in. I woke to the sound of the window blinds clattering, not from wind, from movement. I sat up in bed, heart already hammering, and in the sliver of moonlight falling across the wall, I saw them, handprints pressed against the inside of the window. Greasy, smeared, and wet, like whatever had left them didn't have skin, just moisture and hunger. They weren't shaped right either. Too many fingers, too long, they'd been carved out of bone and nightmare. I reached for the flashlight. It wasn't on the nightstand. I turned, and there she was. Not June. Something else. It stood in the doorway of the bedroom. Tall, hunched, covered in what looked like wet bark or skin stretched too thin across a frame that didn't quite know how to stand. Its face was wrong, empty. No eyes, just smooth, rippling texture like the surface of a drum pulled tight over bone. But it knew me. I could feel it in my chest. It knew my name. It knew my guilt. It knew I was the one who touched the seal, and it had followed that thread of memory all the way to this moment. June screamed from the front of the RV. I turned, broke the trance, ran. She was on the floor, hands over her ears, eyes wide and full of terror. I grabbed her, shook her hard. "We have to go. Now." We didn't take anything, not the generator, not our wallets. We ran barefoot into the gravel lot, slamming the door behind us and sprinting for the campground showers. Other campers must have seen us. 2 grown adults in sleep clothes running like hell through a moonlit campground. But no one stopped us. No one said a word. I didn't sleep that night. June passed out in the corner of the concrete restroom, trembling. When the sun rose, we called a tow truck. I wouldn't go back inside. Neither of us would. We let the guy hook up the RV and drive it 20 miles into Boise, where we sold it 2 days later for cash on the spot. That was 2 months ago. We've been living in motels since. But the thing is, it's not done. We still find the circles. On our rental cars, on the mirrors in restrooms. Once carved into the drywall of a cheap highway motel room. Always faint. Always just visible enough to know it's still watching. It doesn't want the RV. It doesn't want land. It wants memory. And now that I've told you this story, now that these words live inside your head, maybe it's watching you too. I didn't tell June what I felt the moment I said that last line aloud in the motel room, because it felt like I wasn't the only one who had heard it. There was this low tick, almost a click, in the wall behind the headboard. Then nothing. The silence that followed was so sharp it felt physical, like someone had turned the air solid. June was in the shower, humming to herself, trying to keep it together. I sat there staring at the wall, wondering if I had just made it worse by saying the words out loud, by sharing it, by giving it a voice again. Because that's what it really wanted, wasn't it? Not destruction. Not chaos. Some things don't want to be forgotten. Some spirits don't want to be cleansed. Some forces survive only through story, through echo. Snake River didn't want us gone. It wanted us changed. That night, I had the dream again. Except this time it wasn't a dream. I woke up standing in the motel parking lot in my socks. It was 3:12 a.m. The pavement was freezing. The sky was choked with clouds, and I had dirt under my fingernails. My hands were trembling, not from cold, but from the sick, sinking realization that I had no idea how I got there. When I turned back toward the motel, I saw June in the window. She wasn't looking out. She was staring straight ahead, unmoving, her face bathed in that pale blue motel glow, her mouth open just slightly, her expression completely blank. I ran, barged through the door. June. She blinked, slow, like something had been watching through her eyes. I saw it again, she whispered. The circle. But it was in our bed this time. I walked over to the rumpled sheets and pulled them back. There, in the center of the mattress, embedded in the yellowed foam like a brand, was the spiral. Same diameter, same precision, but now it was inside. I sat down hard. "This doesn't stop," I said, and she just nodded, eyes still wide, lips starting to tremble. "It's inside us now." For the next week, we didn't talk to anyone. We kept moving, motel to motel, using fake names. I started drawing the circles in notebooks over and over, trying to see if something would unlock, trying to understand if the spiral had a pattern, a language, something I could translate and finally reason with. But all it did was get clearer, more symmetrical, more intentional. I started hearing drumming in my ears, like a heartbeat that wasn't mine. It came when I tried to sleep, when I was quiet, when I let my thoughts slow down long enough for something else to slip in. And always, beneath the rhythm, there was that voice. Not words, not language, recognition. That's the part that scared me the most. The fact that whatever this was didn't need to speak, it just needed to be remembered. And I was doing exactly what it wanted. Telling you this now, it feels like I've already failed. Like every word I say is another step down that spiral, another foot deeper into the hollow space it came from. Because I'm not warning you, not really. I'm feeding it. I didn't want to go back, but we did. 3 weeks after we sold the RV, we drove back out toward Snake River. Not in the same vehicle, not to the same coordinates, but near. Close enough that my body started reacting before we even saw the turnoff. My stomach clenched. My palms broke out in sweat. The back of my neck buzzed like a wire stripped raw. June didn't speak the entire drive. When we parked the rental car, we didn't take anything with us. No bags, no phones, just our bodies, our breath, and whatever the hell had been crawling through our thoughts since that first night on the bluff. The land remembered us. That was the worst part. The trail had changed. The brush was cleared where it used to be tangled. The path was deeper, worn, like something had been walking it again and again since we left. We didn't find the stone circle. We found the opening. A fissure, about the size of a manhole, had cracked open at the base of the ravine, exactly where the stone had been. It wasn't a cave. It wasn't a tunnel. It was absence. Pure black, like the land had peeled itself back to reveal the throat of something buried too deep to name. June stepped toward it. I grabbed her hand. No. She didn't resist, but she didn't back away either. "I don't think it wants to hurt us," she said, her voice hollow. "It just wants to be. It wants us to know it's still here." I shook my head. "That's exactly how it gets in." The smell hit us again, thicker this time. Less like rot, more like birth. Like something new trying to claw its way into this world, through memory, through story. We left. No ceremony, no final words, just two people walking backward from the edge of something that didn't belong on a map. Something older than memory, something that wears guilt like a face and follows silence like a scent trail. We've kept moving ever since. We don't camp anymore. We don't stay in one place more than 3 nights. We stopped telling people where we've been, because the ones who ask, they always come back with circles, drawn on napkins, scratched into truck beds, found beneath their tents in the sand. Some of them call it folklore, others think we're crazy. But I'm telling you now, truth doesn't care if you believe it. What we found out there wasn't a ghost story, it was a doorway. And the thing waiting on the other side doesn't need you to believe, it only needs you to listen. We tried silence. For weeks, we didn't speak of it. We didn't whisper about Snake River or the stone or the figure that moved through shadow with no face. We thought maybe if we didn't name it, it couldn't grow. But silence is still attention. It's still reverence in its own way. And whatever we unearthed in that dry canyon, it thrived on being remembered. Ignoring it was like trying not to think about your own breath. Eventually you feel it again, the slow inhale, the thick pressure in your lungs, and then you remember. You're still carrying it. June started sleepwalking. At first, I thought it was stress. We were worn thin, road-weary, mentally threadbare. She'd get up in the middle of the night and move around the room with these strange, slow motions, touching the corners, humming something low and rhythmic, something I didn't recognize but felt too familiar. I tried waking her once. I shook her shoulder and said her name. She turned and looked at me. Not startled, not confused. She smiled, and then said in a voice that wasn't quite hers, "It's remembering you too." The next morning, she didn't recall any of it. Not the walking, not the voice, nothing. That was when I realized something critical. This wasn't about haunting. It wasn't even about us anymore. The thing we touched, whatever force or spirit or memory, wasn't just clinging to us. It was rebuilding itself through us, piece by piece, dream by dream. Every night, I saw more of it. The figure in my sleep had started to gain shape. What was once a faceless silhouette now had texture. Flesh that resembled bark, hair like river moss, arms that were too long and too quiet when they moved. It didn't speak, but its presence pressed in like heat. I could smell that scorched, iron-heavy scent when I opened my eyes in the morning. Sometimes I'd wake with dirt beneath my fingernails. One night, I found myself outside again, standing on a gravel road, barefoot, clutching a spiral drawn in charcoal onto the hood of our rental car. June's voice behind me, "You're feeding it." I turned, breathless. "So are you." And she didn't deny it. We'd started sharing dreams, same figure, same breathing, same slow rhythm, like the beat of the world cracking open in reverse. We weren't just being haunted. We were being rewritten. There was one night, this was in a small campground in Washington, tucked beside the Columbia River, where I saw it in daylight. Not a hallucination, not a reflection. I saw it. It was early morning. The fog was thick. I stepped outside to pour the gray water from the sink into the disposal, and across the campground between two cottonwoods, I saw something standing. Still, watching. Its arms hung low. Its shape was too narrow. It had no facial features, just skin like old leather, drawn tight and wet across its head. I froze. I felt my knees lock, my mind screaming at me to run, but I didn't, because part of me was already recognizing it. I had called it with memory. The whisper came again. Same voice. "Close now." Inside my head. "Closer." I blinked. It was gone. But when I got back to the camper, June was sitting bolt upright in bed, mouth open, eyes wide. "You saw it," she whispered. It wasn't a question. She had seen it too. We left that morning, but the trail didn't fade. Each new stop brought another trace of it. A new pattern, a new whisper, a new moment where the air around us turned heavy with breath that wasn't ours. At a rest stop in Idaho, a man tapped my shoulder and asked if I'd ever been out by Hell's Canyon. Just like that. No introduction, no reason. Just the question, raw and blunt like a blade. I said no. He smiled, slow and crooked, and walked away. Later, I found a circle of ash beneath our camper. At that point, it became obvious. This thing didn't just live in a ravine off Snake River anymore. It had followed every mile we traveled, folding itself into every conversation, every act of forgetting, every pause between words. It wasn't bound by location. It was bound by invitation, and we had opened the door. So we tried one last thing. June found a tribal elder willing to speak with us. He didn't offer solutions. He didn't offer comfort. He listened, quietly, patiently. And when we finished our story, he looked at us with an expression I'll never forget. Not fear, not anger. Respect. "You disturbed a seal," he said. "Not a grave, not a curse, a reminder. Those stones aren't meant to keep spirits in. They're meant to keep memory asleep. You woke it." I asked him what it was. He said the names were gone, erased by time, by war, by the burning of stories. But once it had been a lesson, a punishment bound to memory, something created by ancient hands to make sure pain would not be forgotten. He leaned in close. "You carry it now, until someone else takes it. That broke something in me because I realized I couldn't outrun it, but I could warn you. So I'm telling you now, if you go out near Snake River and you find a stone circle carved into the earth, don't touch it. Don't speak near it. Don't dream near it. And whatever you do, don't remember it, because that's how it breathes. That's how it moves. That's how it finds new names. I sometimes wonder if it would have been better if we'd never found it. If we had just driven past that gravel turnoff, picked another patch of dirt to boondock, stayed closer to cell service and civilization. But then again, I think that's the illusion, the lie we cling to, that the danger is out there in some remote corner of the country, waiting for fools like us to stumble into it. But this thing, the one we unearthed, it wasn't waiting. It was listening. It was buried not in the land, but in us, in the forgetting, in the long, quiet generations between pain and truth, in the bloodlines that once remembered how to hold darkness beneath stone, and the modern hands that broke it open without knowing what they were doing. We tried to run. We tried to silence ourselves. We tried to bury it back in secrecy, but that's not how memory works. Memory echoes. That last conversation with the tribal elders stuck with us. Not just his words, but his face. How calm he was. How sad. I think he knew it was too late for us, but he still gave us a choice. You can pass it, he said, through story, through warning. If others carry it, the weight thins. But if you keep it, eventually it becomes you. I didn't understand it fully back then, but I do now. This thing isn't a curse in the Hollywood sense. It's not a ghost or a demon. It's a memory that remembers itself. A trauma sealed so deep in the bones of the land that even time couldn't kill it. And now, because of us, it's loose, not wild, not angry, awake. And it's looking for minds that will carry it forward. You, me, whoever hears this and can't stop thinking about it. So here's the truth, raw and unpolished. There was once a people who buried a great wrong beneath the Snake River Valley. A wrong so consuming, so soul deep, it could not be cleansed. So they sealed it in a circle of stone, cut with tools older than language, and left it for time to forget. But time didn't forget. We did. We lost the old warnings. We paved the gravel roads. We put up campsites and fire rings and let curious people like me roll in on rubber tires and YouTube dreams and boondocking forums looking for silence. And we found it. The wrong thing. The thing that was never meant to be found. Now I see it even in daylight, reflected in car windows, burned into my shadow when I walk under noon sun. Once in Colorado, I looked down at a puddle in a parking lot and saw it standing behind me, not reflected like a mirror, but beneath the surface, as if the water was a veil and it was watching through from the other side. Its face is still blank, but I know it knows me now. And it's patient. It doesn't need to chase. It just needs me to keep talking, to keep remembering. That's what keeps it alive. But maybe that's the key. Because if it must be remembered, then I can at least shape that memory. I can teach others not to touch it. I can leave road flares in the dark, mark the places we should never step again. Maybe if enough of us share the burden, if enough of us carry the echo with care instead of curiosity, it can settle again. Maybe not to sleep, but at least to silence. June and I, we don't sleep in the same place twice anymore. We don't own an RV. We don't own anything that rolls. But sometimes in those thin hours just before dawn, we lie still in silence and listen. And sometimes we hear it. Not the drumming, not the breathing, but the calling, names, new ones, old ones. And somewhere in that list of whispers, we always hear our own. This is our penance now, to remember so you don't have to carry it alone. So if you find yourself near Snake River, if the wind changes direction, if the ground grows quiet and you see a circle in the dirt that wasn't there yesterday, turn around. Do not walk toward it. Do not touch it. Do not think about it. And if it calls your name, do not answer. Because once it knows you, you don't belong to yourself anymore. You belong to the burial, and the burial is still listening. I wasn't looking for anything mystical. I just needed a break. After 3 years of working remote tech support through a screen that never blinked, I started to feel like a ghost in my own body. I'd wake up already anxious, eat standing up, pace while brushing my teeth. Everything had become static, repetitive, dry-eyed, and sleepless. I'd scroll campsite maps at 3 a.m. like they were escape hatches. That's how I ended up in the Columbia River Gorge. Alone, parked in a pull-through site with my dusty red SUV and a borrowed REI tent that still smelled like cedar from someone else's trip. The river ran low that summer, slow and glassy, barely murmuring over the stones. I thought it would be good for me. That was the phrase I kept saying, like an apology to the part of me that didn't believe it. It'll be good for me. The site I picked wasn't popular. It was one of those semi-established spots, gravel turnout, some trampled fire rings, and a weathered vault toilet with a half-rusted latch. But it was quiet. Too quiet. No kids, no generators, no Bluetooth speakers. Just wind in the gorge and that long horizon of layered cliffs stretching endlessly into eastern Oregon. I set up camp just before golden hour when the sun fell behind the western rim and the stone began to glow, soft amber on the face of the rocks. That's when I noticed it. About 300 yards from my site, slightly off trail, was a ridge that jutted out like a broken finger. It wasn't large or dramatic. Not some towering monolith, just a cluster of dark basalt columns, maybe 10 feet high, crooked and stacked like some lazy vertebrae. But it was the angle that caught me. The first time I looked at it, it pointed to the river. A few minutes later, it looked like it pointed inland. I told myself it was the shifting shadows. I blinked. No. I stared longer, squinted, looked away. Looked back. It hadn't moved, of course. That's not how rocks work. But something about it felt off. Not just the shape, but the way my eyes adjusted to it, like my brain couldn't lock it down. The lines wouldn't settle. A moment of vertigo, as if I'd caught something halfway through turning, like when you think someone's watching you and you look up just a second too late. I shook it off, walked back to my camp, stirred some soup, unrolled my sleeping bag. The rock was just rock. The gorge played tricks. But that night when I tried to sleep, I couldn't stop replaying that flicker, that tiny, gnawing tick of the formation's position. Each time I blinked in memory, it moved again. My brain filled in imaginary frames between the blinks, shifting, turning. The wind howled strangely that night, not in gusts, but in long, low pulses, almost rhythmic. I remember lying flat in my tent, watching the nylon walls shudder and breathe with the wind's pressure. And under that, so faint I might have dreamed it, came a static sound, like a radio barely tuned. I told myself it was the wind in the cliff's face, or maybe the river churning against the rocks. But I slept with one ear open, my body rigid in that way where you convince yourself you're relaxed just enough to sleep. But you're not. When I woke up the next morning, the sun was already up. My phone was dead, forgot to charge it, and the trail map I'd left folded neatly on my camp chair had blown several feet into the brush. I found it wedged under a bush, partially wet with dew. I made coffee over the camp stove, trying to recalibrate. I told myself I was here to disconnect. No phone, no screen, no mirrors. It was supposed to help. But then I looked back toward the formation, and my stomach turned. It had moved again. Not drastically, just a few degrees. But it was clear, unmistakable. A line of trees that had been visible behind it the day before were now hidden, and a ridge that had been blocked was now exposed. The formation had rotated, maybe 15 degrees clockwise, like the hand of a clock ticking forward through the night. I stared, unblinking this time, refused to look away, watched until my eyes stung. Nothing moved, not even the grass. I took a walk. That's what I told myself. Just get closer. Prove its perspective. Climb a little. Get it out of my system. I followed the bluff's edge until the wind picked up, blasting dust into my teeth. The closer I got, the more the air felt thick, like walking into an invisible wall of pressure. When I reached the base of the formation, something strange happened. I expected the structure to tower, but it didn't. It felt smaller up close, duller, diminished. Like a photo that loses sharpness the longer you stare. The The basalt was cool to the touch, like almost damp, despite the dry morning. And then I blinked. Nothing changed. But a low whine rose in my ears, like when a microphone gets too close to a speaker. I took a step back. My breath hitched. I don't remember walking back to camp. Not exactly. There are patches missing, like the light skipped. 1 minute I was under the rock, the next I was pouring water into my thermos, hands shaking. And then the voices started. Not words, just suggestion. The wind would rush across the gorge and dip low against the cliffs, and buried in that pressure was a rhythm, cadence, almost a voice, but more like a mimic. I heard my name. Not loud, not even clear, just the shape of it. Not shouted, whispered, like someone was trying it on. I didn't pack up. That's the strangest part. I didn't leave. I told myself it was nothing, that I was tired, dehydrated. I rationed out granola and jerky, scribbled a few lines in my notebook, meaningless phrases like "watch the shadows and the stone seas," as if that would ground me. But every hour, I looked back at the formation, and every hour it faced a slightly different direction, only when I blinked, only when I let myself blink. I stayed another night. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted to prove something. Maybe I thought I was on the verge of understanding it. But that night, the static got louder. My ears rang until my teeth buzzed. The wind felt alive. And sometime after midnight, I heard footsteps in the gravel outside my tent. Not animals, not twigs snapping. Footsteps, slow, even human. I didn't move. I lay still in my sleeping bag, my hand clenched around the dull aluminum handle of the folding knife I always kept zipped into the side pocket. Not because I thought it would help. If someone wanted to hurt me, that thin blade wasn't going to stop them. But I needed to feel something real in my hand. Something I could point to later and say, "You weren't crazy, you were ready." The steps didn't wander. They approached in a line, one footfall at a time, crunching across the gravel until they stopped directly beside my tent wall, not even a foot away. There was no flashlight, no rustle of movement, just stillness. The kind that fills your ears when you're buried under a blanket and holding your breath. Then a low, dragging inhale, long, wet, like someone breathing through their mouth clogged with river water. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. My tongue felt thick. My lungs trembled under the weight of silence. Every survival instinct in my body screamed to move, to run, to flee, but I stayed still, completely still, as if even the shift of a tendon would bring it crashing in. And then it exhaled. Not air, not breath, static, like a burst of white noise fuzzing out of a broken speaker, loud and short, like a sharp pulse that made my eardrums contract. And just like that, it was gone. I lay there until morning, eyes open, paralyzed. My muscles locked so tight that when the light finally started to bleed through the nylon, my body refused to sit up. I rolled out of the sleeping bag like I'd been held underwater all night and finally let go. I tore the tent down in 15 minutes. Didn't even bother folding it, just shoved it into the hatchback, sleeping bag and all, and slammed the door. Coffee, forgotten. No food, no cell signal, no map. Just engine on, gear in reverse, tires spitting dirt as I backed out of the turnout. But here's the part I still don't understand. I drove for 30 minutes, maybe more, down the gravel access road toward the highway. The cliffs passed like ghosts on either side. No other cars, no signs, no cell reception. I tried to play music, but all I got from the speakers was more static. And then, just as I rounded a bend, I saw it, the rock formation. Off to my right, perched high above the tree line, it had followed me. Or I had looped. But I know that ridge, I marked it on my GPS before the trip. There's only one like that, one that slants like a spine against the gorge. And it was facing me, dead on, like it had turned to watch me leave. I slammed on the brakes so hard the coffee thermos in the cup holder flipped and spilled. I got out of the car, legs trembling, chest tight, and stared up at it. I blinked. It turned. I blinked again. It turned more. Not fast, not jerky, just incrementally. Like a time lapse of a flower bending toward the sun. But the sun wasn't out, and I swear the wind went still. I got back in the car and drove. I didn't care if I busted the suspension, I hit ruts, took corners hard, rattled over washboard gravel. I just needed pavement. I needed signal. I needed something that wasn't the gorge. Eventually, I found it. A small roadside gas station with a single pump and a dusty American flag hanging limp in the heat. There was a man inside, old and narrow-faced, with dark eyes that didn't leave mine as I fumbled for water and a charging cable. "You come down from the ridge?" he asked without looking away. My throat was too dry to answer. I just nodded. He stared at me a second too long, then said, "Most people don't camp solo out there. Gets weird." Weird, that's the word he used. Not dangerous, not beautiful. Weird. I wanted to ask more, but something told me not to. Like the question itself would pull me back. I paid in cash, didn't wait for change, and got back on the road. I drove west until the cliffs gave way to forest, and the forest gave way to suburban sprawl, and the radio finally stopped hissing and returned to some overplayed classic rock. By the time I reached my apartment that evening, I felt wrong, like something had been stripped from me out there. Like I'd stared too long at something that wasn't meant to be seen. And for a few days, that was the end of it. I didn't talk about it, didn't post pictures. My friends wouldn't get it anyway. They'd say I was sleep deprived, paranoid, that the rock never moved, that I imagined the steps, that wind makes strange sounds in the gorge, but I couldn't shake it, especially the sound, that static. It started coming through my earbuds when I tried to listen to podcasts. Brief, but sharp, like a voice trying to come through. I switched headphones, switched devices, same thing. Then one night, I was brushing my teeth when I saw it, just for a second, in the reflection of the dark window above my sink. The silhouette of the formation, not behind me, not in the glass, in my head. I blinked. It shifted. I ran the water until the sink overflowed, trying to drown the sound. But the static didn't come from outside anymore. It came from inside. And in the middle of that surge, I heard it again. My name, only this time it was perfect, clear, calm, spoken in my own voice. I stopped brushing, just stood there, foam drying in the corners of my mouth, listening to the dripping faucet and the distant hum of my refrigerator. Everything looked normal, perfectly mundane. But inside, something had twisted. Not pain exactly, more like pressure. A dense, slow coil in the center of my chest that made it hard to breathe deeply, like I was being warned not to. I didn't sleep that night. I left the lights on in every room and sat on the couch with a blanket pulled tight around my shoulders, watching the shadows move across the walls. Sometimes, when headlights passed on the street below, the light would catch the bookshelf or the hallway in just the wrong way, just enough to make a shape. An illusion of a ridge, a line of stone that shouldn't be there. And every time I blinked, I checked to see if it had moved. Of course, nothing had, not at first. But as dawn bled through the curtains, I noticed something else, something worse. My reflection didn't blink when I did, only for a second, but it lagged, just enough to feel wrong, and not just once. I tried it again, slowly, like I was testing my own system. Blink. Wait, watch. And then I saw it, the faintest twitch, like my reflection had adjusted to match me, not mirrored me, like it had been watching. I threw a towel over the bathroom mirror and duct taped it down. That was 2 days ago. I haven't been back to work. I told my manager I had food poisoning. He didn't even question it, just said, "Get some rest." But rest isn't possible anymore. Not with the sound in my ears. It's constant now. A low-frequency hum like I'm standing under a power line that never ends. I bought a white noise machine to try to drown it out, but all it does is sync with the tone in my head. They harmonize, and every time I close my eyes, the formation is there, spinning, not fast, not violent, just steady, turning on some axis that I can't quite locate, and the ground beneath it distorts slightly, like heat waves over pavement. I started sketching it. At first, just to get it out of me, to externalize it. But the more I drew, the more I noticed things I hadn't seen before. Like the shadows between the columns weren't just shade. They were shaped like gaps, like doorways, or mouths. And the base of the formation, what I thought was just rock, had indentations, like joints or vertebrae. It wasn't a natural outcrop. It was a body. and it had turned to look at me. I haven't shown the sketches to anyone. I don't think I can. They're wrong in a way that isn't artistic. They pulse, not literally, but when I look at them long enough, the lines seem to curve. They bend slightly to the left, like they're being pulled by something just off the edge of the page. I thought about going back, just to prove I'm not losing it. I even looked up the coordinates I marked before the trip, but when I opened the save pin on my map app, it was gone. The entire ridge no longer appears. I searched on Google Earth. Nothing. Just forest and bluff and a few fire roads. No mention of a basalt formation with that shape. It's like it never existed. But I saw it. I felt it, and somewhere inside me, I can feel it still watching. That's the part that makes no sense. How can a place have attention? Unless it isn't a place. I keep coming back to that night. The footsteps, the breath, the static. It wasn't trying to scare me. It was trying to copy me, learn me, understand the rhythm of my steps, the weight of my body in the gravel, the pattern of my breath as I slept. It was studying, mimicking. And when it spoke my name in my voice, it wasn't calling out. It was testing how it sounded saying it. Like trying on a coat. I haven't told anyone this. Who would believe me? They'd say it was stress, that I broke under isolation, that nature can play tricks on you. But what if it wasn't a trick? What if the gorge is a kind of mirror? Not for faces, but for attention. You look too long, and it looks back. You blink, and it moves. You leave, and it follows. I don't know how much longer I can stay in this apartment. The shadows keep rearranging themselves at night. I cover the mirrors, unplug the electronics, but somehow it always finds a way in, psychologically. Like I left a door open in my mind when I stared too long at that formation. Like it stepped through, and now it's rearranging the furniture. I see it in small ways. When I wake up, the bedroom door is half open, even though I remember closing it. My coffee mugs are rotated slightly, all the handles pointing in the same direction. The stack of papers on my desk leans 1 degree to the left, always to the left. I measured, I moved them, and the next morning, they shifted back, just like the rock, just like the spin. Every blink is another step in a slow, creeping spiral, and I can feel it turning behind my eyes. I started recording myself while I sleep. Not for proof. At least, that's not why I told myself I did it. I think I just wanted to catch whatever it was in the act, to put a pin in the blur. My phone doesn't have much storage, so I rigged a basic motion-triggered app and set it on my nightstand. Mic open. Screen dimmed. The first night, there were 3 clips. The first was me rolling over, groaning, tangled in sheets, normal. The second was a creak, probably the building shifting, a radiator pinging, but the third, at 3:41 a.m., there was a single sustained tone. Not a sound I made, not anything mechanical, low, warbling static. Faint at first, then sharper, clearer, like an old television screen warming up. And underneath it, a whisper, not words, more like mouth movements. The cadence of human speech without the voice, like something trying to remember how to use a throat. I played it back at half speed, cranked the gain, and what I heard didn't sound like it came from the room. It sounded like it came from inside the phone, like it had learned the path back. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I sat in the corner of the bedroom with my back to the wall, watching the center of the room like it might unfold. And around 4 a.m., I swear the temperature dropped by 10 degrees. No windows open, no breeze, just cold, bone cold. The kind that makes your skin forget how to belong to you. And for just a second, I smelled wet stone, like river rock pulled from deep underground. I thought I heard the sound of gravel shifting just outside the apartment door. I didn't check. I couldn't. Instead, I stayed up and scrolled through photos from my trip to the gorge. I hadn't looked at them since I got back. They were mostly bad. Angled shots of the tent, blurry pine trees, the fire ring, a few of my SUV with the back hatch open. But one photo taken just after sunrise on the second morning stopped me cold. I was trying to photograph the clouds, I remember that. But in the background, on the ridge, the formation, and standing in front of it, barely perceptible, blurred by distance, was a shape, a figure, Not tall, not short, human in outline, but wrong in proportion. The limbs looked rehearsed, like it was posing based on memory, not instinct. Its head turned slightly toward the camera, and I swear on everything, its face was mine. Not perfectly, more like a study of my face. The general features, the placement, the slope of the jaw, close enough that at a glance you'd think it was me, but off by just a few millimeters in every direction, like a mask sculpted from a description. I zoomed in until the pixels blurred, my own face staring back across the distance, standing in front of the formation that should not move. I deleted the photo, but it didn't matter. When I checked my gallery an hour later, it was back. Twice. 2 copies. One brighter than the original, slightly sharper, like it had improved. That was last night. And today I found something else. The rock. Here. Not the full formation, but a fragment. A stone I don't remember owning sitting on my windowsill this morning. Black, hexagonal, cool to the touch. Basalt. Clean, like it had just been shaped. I turned it over in my hand, and for a second, just a second, I felt my pulse skip, like the stone had registered my touch, like it was awake. I set it down and walked away. When I returned, it had rotated, just slightly, a quarter turn counterclockwise, like it was following my steps. I haven't left the apartment today. I'm too afraid I'll come back and find more of the formation waiting here. Or worse, less of me. Because something's changing. I noticed it in the mirror this morning, after I tore down the towel in a panic to see if I was still me. And at first, everything looked fine. Same face, same messy hair, same anxiety hollowing out the eyes. But then I blinked. And for a second, I didn't feel the blink happen. I just saw it occur in the mirror. Like the image acted first and the sensation followed, lagging, out of sync. Like I was becoming the reflection. Like I was being observed. From the inside out, I touched the glass, and it was cold. Not room temperature cold, deep cold, like cave air, like glacier melt, like the wind in the gorge. I backed away, sat down, tried to breathe, but every breath now feels borrowed, like something is timing them, measuring their cadence, waiting for me to stop. So it can begin. I left the apartment this morning, not because I felt better, God no, but because I had to. The air inside had started to taste stale, metallic, like old batteries. My toothbrush handle was warm to the touch. The grout lines in the tile had shifted. I had to get out. I drove without a destination, just turned west and let the roads stack themselves. I figured if I could get far enough from the city, from the walls that watched, maybe I could shake the feeling. Maybe the static would fade. It didn't. It just got quieter, more precise, like it was whispering only to me now. I ended up pulling over near a small trailhead just outside Hood River, a tiny, unremarkable path leading through dry pines and blackberry tangles, probably used by dog walkers and early retirees. No cliffs, no rock formations, no threats. I sat on a log and closed my eyes, and for the first time in days, I let myself think it might be over. I felt almost normal. Until I heard gravel crunch behind me, I turned fast, reflex more than fear, and saw a woman walking toward me on the trail, mid-30s maybe, athletic build, sun hat, soft smile, and for one shattering second I thought I was looking into a mirror, not because she looked exactly like me, she didn't, but her expression, that faint, too calm smile, that stillness in the eyes, it was mine, not the face I wear in photos, the real one. The one I see when I catch myself in the side mirror of the car, crying for no reason. She stopped a few feet away and said, "It's peaceful here." I nodded, but my throat closed up. She tilted her head. "You're not from around here." It wasn't a question. I stood, stiffly, heart pounding. I was just passing through. She looked past me, toward the trees, and then said something I still don't understand. "You brought something back, didn't you?" I felt dizzy. "What?" She pointed at my pocket. I reached down, half knowing before I touched it. The rock. It was there, even though I'd left it on the windowsill, even though I knew I hadn't touched it since. I pulled it out slowly. The woman didn't flinch, didn't even blink. She just stared at it. "It doesn't want to be separate," she said. "None of it does." Then she turned and walked away. No goodbye, No name, just vanished down the trail like she'd never been there at all. I stood there with the stone in my hand, feeling it leach something from me. Warmth, maybe, or presence. When I turned it over, I saw a crack had formed along the bottom, and inside it, thin but clear, was an eye. Not a drawing, not a carving, an actual eye, glossy and pulsing faintly. I threw it into the brush. But as it flew through the air, it didn't tumble. It rotated, smoothly, controlled, spinning like a compass needle caught in a magnetic storm. I ran, not back to the car, just away. I don't remember how long I moved through the trees. It felt like hours, maybe longer. I didn't even realize I was crying until I tasted salt on my lips. Eventually, I collapsed near a dry creek bed, heart pounding, hands bleeding from brambles. I curled into myself like something hunted, and that's when I heard it again. Not the static this time, not the wind. Thin. Childlike, but warped, like it was being played backward on a broken tape. It echoed through the gorge like a memory I'd never had, and beneath it, footsteps. Too many. Far too many. Crunching from all directions, closing in. That's when I realized the gorge doesn't echo sound. It echoes attention. It reflects obsession. And the more I think about it, the more I see it, the more it sees me. I covered my ears, but I could still feel the laughter in my teeth, in my bones. When I finally stumbled back to the car, hours later, there were handprints on every window, smudged, slightly oily, all matching my hand. Each one turned slightly inward, as if trying to reach inside. I didn't drive home. I couldn't bring it back again. I pulled off into a rest stop just before dusk and curled into the passenger seat, blanket around my shoulders, staring into the trees. I thought I saw her again, the woman from the trail, standing just behind the fence line, still smiling, still wearing me. And all I could think was, if you look too long at something, it might look back. I don't remember falling asleep, but I remember waking up. The kind of waking that doesn't feel like sleep ended. It feels like something else began. The inside of the car was freezing. My breath clouded the windshield, and yet the windows were down. All of them. Rolled halfway like someone had cracked them to let something in. There were pine needles on the floor. Mud tracked across the driver's seat, but the doors were still locked. I checked the glove box, the center console, my bag. Everything was in place, nothing stolen, nothing broken, just altered, moved, tasted, like someone or something had sat in the car while I slept. Not to take, just to study. And on the dashboard, resting neatly beside the cracked phone charger, was the rock, not the one I threw. A new one, smoother, sharper, shaped more like a shard than a stone, and etched across one side, deep and fine like a fingernail dragged across wet sand, was a symbol, not a letter, not a language, a spiral. And the moment I saw it, I felt the hum again, not in the air, in my mind, like a tuning fork behind the eyes. I touched it before I could stop myself, and suddenly I remembered things I'd never seen. Dark ridge lines, dry riverbeds, waking up in strange places, beneath bridges, under cliff overhangs, in the hollow spaces between roots. I saw myself walking barefoot through fog, face calm, eyes empty, following something, always toward it. Always turning slightly left. And each time I blinked in those memories, I moved forward, closer to the formation, closer to understanding. But what terrified me wasn't the vision. It was the comfort I felt. Like I belonged in those memories, like I'd been there before. The spiral on the stone was a map, not of places, of movements, of mind states, of obsession. And once you saw it, really saw it, it carved a path into you. I left the rest stop without thinking. I didn't even check my fuel. I just drove back east, back toward the gorge. I told myself I'd stop, that I was just driving to prove I had control. But I didn't stop. Not when the clouds darkened, not when the road narrowed, not when the trees thinned and the land opened like a wound. By dusk, I was back where it all began, back at the pull-off site. But it wasn't the same. Nothing was. The road felt longer, the trees taller, and the formation, it was waiting. Not on the ridge anymore. Closer. Much closer. Now only a few hundred feet from the site, as if it had walked while I was gone. And around its base were others, smaller stones, shorter columns, like a family gathering, like it had replicated or multiplied or bred. I stepped out of the car before I realized what I was doing. Gravel crunched beneath my boots. The wind didn't move. The air had that strange, hard silence, like the world had taken a breath and held it. And then, between two of the taller columns, something moved. It stepped forward, slow, deliberate. And it was me, not exactly, but closer than before. The gait was smoother now, the hands more accurate. It wore my face like a well-practiced expression. And when it opened its mouth, I knew it wouldn't scream. It would speak, and it did, but not aloud. It spoke inside, right behind my eyes. The voice was mine. Let it happen. That's all it said, but I understood. It wasn't threatening me. It was offering. A trade. Sanity for stillness, confusion for peace, a place inside the spiral, a place where nothing moved unless I blinked. And I almost took it. God help me. I almost stepped forward because I was so tired of running from something that lives inside every shadow, every closed eye. But I didn't. I turned, got back in the car and drove faster than I ever have. Didn't look back, didn't blink, didn't breathe until I saw the first gas station lights flicker into view. And even then, I didn't stop. I don't know what's waiting for me next, but I know this. That formation, whatever it is, it's not just a thing. It's an invitation. And once you've looked at it long enough, it doesn't need to follow you because you carry it with you in your thoughts, in your dreams. And in that quiet moment when your eyes begin to close, it moves. I'm not sure how long it's been since I got back. Time's bent now, elastic, frayed. Some days stretch forever, others vanish between heartbeats. I keep a notebook beside my bed to write down the date each morning. Today I opened it to find every page filled. Same sentence, over and over. You blinked. Handwriting nearly perfect, too perfect. Not mine, not quite. I should be gone by now. I should have moved, changed my name, tossed the phone in a river. But I stay. I don't know why. Maybe because I think moving won't help, that whatever's inside me would just ride along silent in the passenger seat until I blinked again. I've tried to warn people, subtly, without sounding like a lunatic, but every time I try, something distorts. The words slip sideways, emails I send end up blank, voicemails glitch with static. Face-to-face conversations leave me with no memory of what I actually said. Once, I wrote everything down on a postcard, just a fragment of the truth, just the part about the gorge. Mailed it to an old friend. A week later, the same postcard came back, but it was blank. No message, no stamp. Just my handwriting on the address line. Still perfect. Still not mine. I've stopped opening the blinds. The reflection in the window isn't always synced anymore. And sometimes when the light hits just right, I swear I see the spiral behind the glass. Turning. Very slowly. Like a drain pulling something down that can't afford to be lost. I avoid mirrors, I avoid eye contact, but it's not enough. I feel it now. In the pause between words, in the silence between footsteps, in the flicker of thought before memory takes hold. It waits there. Patient, endless. Last night I dreamed I was inside it, inside the formation. Not around it, not observing it. Inside. The stone was hollow, cavernous, filled with pale light, like the moon filtered through river silt, and in the center was a spiral carved into the floor. It wasn't flat, it went down. I stood at the edge and looked in. No end. Just curve after curve descending into silence. And as I watched, I realized I could hear every thought I'd ever had echoing from inside it. Every doubt, every moment I second-guessed myself, every whisper I'd ignored. They'd taken root there and they were growing. I woke up gasping, sweat cold against my spine, heart slamming like it was trying to punch its way out. The first thing I saw was the stone, back again, on the nightstand, smaller this time, almost delicate and cracked. From within the crack, a single sliver of something shone. Not light, not reflection, a gaze, like it was waiting for me to finish what I started, like it trusted I would. I haven't slept since, can't. I pace the apartment at night. I unplug everything. I keep the lights on, but dim. I talk out loud sometimes just to make sure I still sound like myself. But lately, even that's uncertain. My voice has started to feel foreign in my throat, too smooth, too symmetrical. And today, in the mirror above the sink, just for a breath of a second, I saw something watching me from behind my own eyes. Not through them, behind. Like the shape inside a mask you didn't realize you were wearing. And now I don't know if I'm telling this story or if it is. Because the spiral never stops. It doesn't end. It doesn't want to. It feeds on attention. It feeds on recognition. And the more I describe it, the clearer it becomes. I can see it now in the grain of the wood on my floor, in the dust pattern on the windowsill, in the way the fan blades rotate overhead, and I know if I blink at the wrong time, even just once, I'll wake up somewhere else, or worse, I won't wake up at all. I'll still be here, but not me, just a better version. Smiling, polished still, and watching you. I've been speaking into this recorder for hours now. I don't even know if it's working. I've taken the battery out and put it back in 3 times. Each time, the timestamp resets to 0 zoom, like it doesn't want to keep time anymore, like it's waiting. I tried writing everything down instead by hand, but the pen wouldn't touch the paper. It hovered, skipped, as if the surface was coated in static. I don't know what's real anymore, not in the dramatic horror movie sense, in the way you forget what gravity feels like until you question it, like, if I step too hard, will the floor give? If I look too long at the wall, will it blink back? Last night I dreamed of my own voice. Not words, just tone. Speaking calmly, gently. Let go. It said it over and over like a chant, like a lullaby. Let go, let go, let go. And when I did, when I finally surrendered in that dream, I felt myself tilt inward, like a shelf of rock collapsing into a canyon, like falling into the spiral. This morning, I woke up on the floor. All the doors in my apartment were open, every cabinet, every closet, even the fridge. And on the tile in the kitchen, written in perfect ash gray sand, was that same spiral, drawn fingertip by fingertip. No wind in the apartment, no open windows, just the mark. Waiting. Asking is, I understand now. Not all of it, not why it picked me, or if it picks at all. But I understand the mechanism. The spiral is not just a shape. It's a function, a rotation, a repetition. It's the thought you keep returning to, the name you hear once and never forget, the way your eye is drawn again and again to the same spot in the corner of a room. The spiral isn't a place. It's a pattern. And once your brain registers it, it wants to complete it. The mind hates unfinished things. That's how it gets in. That's how it grows. The first time I saw the formation, it planted the shape, a single rotation, just enough to unbalance me. And every time I blinked, every time I turned back, I fed it. Even remembering it is part of the spiral. Even this, me speaking now, trying to warn you, is another revolution, another turn of the wheel. Because if you've listened this far, if the shape has taken hold in your head, then it's not just my story anymore. You'll see it soon. Maybe in a crack on the sidewalk, a knot in a tree, the whirl of your ceiling fan. You'll think it's coincidence. You'll laugh it off, but then you'll notice it shift, just slightly, only when you blink. And then you'll look back, and looking is all it needs. I'm done now. Not because I've beaten it, because I understand it. The spiral doesn't punish, it doesn't chase, it waits. It lets you unravel yourself. And when you're ready, when your attention has lapped the same track enough times to carve a groove, it steps in, softly, like a shadow into shade. And by the time you notice it standing there, it's already wearing your name. So if you're hearing this, if you still think you're safe, here's the only advice I can give. Don't look too long at the gorge. Don't try to understand it. Don't map it. Don't name it. Don't blink while you're near it. And whatever you do, don't look back. They say when the mountains speak, you don't run. You listen. That's the mistake I made. I listened too closely. I'd been retired almost 7 years by then. My name's Sam Dory, 64 years old, 25 of those spent in mountain search and rescue all over Washington state, mostly the North Cascades. I've seen things people shouldn't see, recovered bodies that had no business being where we found them. But I never thought the mountain itself might be the thing that needed rescuing from whatever it had become. It was early October when I drove my old Winnebago up to the park. The Cascades were golden with larch and reddening vine maple, but a chill had settled into the air, one of those silent warnings that winter wasn't far behind. I'd planned to camp solo for a week near Colonial Creek Campground, maybe hike up Thunder Creek Trail and clear my head. It was supposed to be quiet time, a farewell to the wilderness before snowpack sealed the higher elevations for the season. The first night was calm. The air was clean and crisp, the kind of cold that stiffens your joints but makes your lungs feel purified. I sat by my small fire, sipping cheap bourbon out of a metal cup and listening to the wind pass over the Douglas fir canopy like ocean waves. It started around midnight. A sound. I don't mean the usual coyote calls or owl hoots echoing through the valley. I mean a sound, a low-frequency vibration. It came not from the air, but through the ground, like the mountains were groaning. It wasn't loud, but I felt it more than heard it. In my chest, in my teeth. Even my coffee mug on the folding table had started to tremble slightly, almost imperceptibly. I thought it might be a quake. Wouldn't be the first time this place rumbled underfoot. But the shaking never came. It was just that humming, that strange long tone that vibrated deep under everything, and then it stopped. Clean cut, no fade out. Gone like it had never happened. I went to bed telling myself it had to be wind, maybe blowing across a cave mouth or some weird acoustic anomaly down by the gorge. I'd heard stranger things on the job. You don't make it a decade in these woods without hearing something that sends your imagination running. But when I woke up, something felt off. I couldn't name it exactly. The world just seemed stilled, the way it does right before a predator reveals itself. Birdsong was gone, no squirrels darting through the leaves. Even the river sounded muted. And that's when I noticed the elk. Just one, standing motionless at the edge of the clearing. Its ears were pulled back, nostrils flared, eyes wide. It wasn't grazing or wandering, just standing there, facing north into the deeper range. I made a little sound, cleared my throat, and the thing didn't even blink. I stepped forward, and the elk bolted so fast it left a dust trail behind it, straight in the direction of the mountain, toward the sound. I should have packed up that morning. I should have trusted my gut. Instead, I boiled coffee and told myself I was too old to get scared over animal behavior. That afternoon, I went for a short walk along the shoreline. The sky was that pale blue you only get after the first frost. I tried to enjoy it, tried to push away the gnawing silence. But as I walked, I noticed the prints. Not human, hoof prints. But they were scattered, overlapping and meandering in tight, chaotic spirals. I followed them a bit, then paused. There were small birds, juncos or sparrows, lying on the ground, dead, no wounds, just collapsed like they'd fallen mid-flight. My breath caught in my throat. I stared at them, and that hum started again. It came from the north, deep and bone-heavy. My legs tensed involuntarily, and the hair on my arms rose. The sound lasted longer this time, maybe 2 minutes, pulsing like the world's slowest heartbeat. The trees around me quivered and the wind didn't move. I made my way back to the RV without fully realizing I was walking backward. Back at camp, I turned on my radio scanner. Nothing. No chatter from rangers, no interference, not even static. Just dead air. Then, just after sunset, I heard the trees. They were shaking, not in the wind. It was calm, but the branches rattled like something heavy was walking, low and slow, far in the valley below. It didn't sound like one thing. It sounded like a dozen creatures moving in a syncopated rhythm, but with no visible source. I told myself I'd leave first light. No more pushing it. Something was wrong here. Deeply wrong. That night, I lay in bed staring up through the RV's ceiling vent, watching a cloudless sky turn black. Around 3 a.m., I woke to the strangest thing I've ever heard in my life. Whistling. But not human. It mimicked the exact 3-tone chirp I used to signal my old SAR team when someone was found. High, low, high. A pattern only our unit used. A pattern no one outside the team would know. But this version was off. Metallic and warped, like it was being played on broken wind chimes. And it was coming from the tree line. I sat bolt upright, heart pounding. I wanted to believe it was just some animal mimicry. Ravens can do that, and I've heard some eerily human bird calls in my day. But this wasn't a bird. It kept repeating, high, low, high, and then silence. I waited with my knife in one hand and a flashlight in the other. An hour passed, then 2. I didn't sleep again. Morning came sluggish and pale. I was packing up camp when I saw the elk again. But this time it wasn't standing. It was lying half submerged in the river, neck twisted unnaturally, legs jutting stiffly. No predators nearby, no scavengers. The body hadn't been touched. Something had killed it. Quickly, silently. I started the RV and didn't even bother dumping the tanks. I just wanted out. But as I pulled onto the road leading back toward Highway 20, the hum came back, louder than ever. The wheel shook in my hands, my fillings buzzed in my teeth, and my heart began to race like it was being manipulated. Not fear, rhythm. Like the sound was trying to get inside of me and push. That's when I saw the ranger. Middle of the road, standing perfectly still. She didn't move, didn't wave, didn't blink, just stared. Her uniform looked right, green and brown, hat low over her eyes, but something about her face was off, stretched somehow, pale and tight, like skin over wax. I stopped the RV 30 feet from her and rolled the window down just enough to yell, "You okay?" No answer. She just tilted her head, slowly, and then the sound spiked, roaring so loud I screamed, clutching my head, and she vanished. I don't mean walked away. I mean gone. One moment she was there, next she wasn't. No footstep, no shadow, no sound, but that awful, bone-deep hum. I didn't stop driving until I hit Marble Mount, but the sound didn't stay behind. It came with me. It's quieter now, but some nights when I lie still, I can feel it again, in my bones, and I think it's waiting for me to come back. You don't forget a sound like that, not when it bypasses your ears and sinks straight into your spine. I stayed in Marble Mount for 3 nights, parked my Winnebago in a gravel lot behind a diner, plugged into shore power, and pretended the world made sense again. I didn't talk to anyone, didn't report anything. What was I supposed to say? That a ranger melted into thin air while my heart tried to sink with a noise no one else could hear? I just kept the blinds closed and the radio off, listening to the dull hum that lingered like tinnitus. But on the 3rd night, something changed. I was lying in bed, TV off, stove cold, lights dimmed, and the noise crept in again. It wasn't coming from outside this time. It was in the walls, a faint thrumming through the RV's frame like a distant freight train passing underground. My cabinets began to rattle, not violently, more like they were agreeing with it. And then the dog started barking. I hadn't noticed him before. A big black shepherd mix in the lot across from me, chained to the bumper of an old Ford pickup. He'd been quiet the whole time I was there. But now, he lost it. Barked so hard, his paws scraped across the gravel. He wasn't barking at me. He was barking at the mountain. Even from town, I could see it, that shadowed ridge rising over the trees, sharper now in the moonlight, cold, silent. I sat at the dinette, watching that dog bark and watching the clouds over the ridgeline not move. And then the dog stopped, just froze, mouth open, head tilted, and lay down. Not like he was tired, like he'd been shut off. I left the next morning, didn't pay the breakfast tab I'd never eaten, just drove east, out of the mountains, out of the shadow. I made it all the way to Spokane before I stopped again. Thought I could settle there. Flat land, far from the peaks. But it didn't help, because the sound doesn't care about terrain. It doesn't belong to the rocks. It belongs to whatever's under them. I started getting the dreams, always the same. I'm in the forest again, hiking toward Thunder Creek, except the trees are too tall, their trunks curving slightly inward, like they're leaning down to listen. The trail hums under my boots. I look down and realize the path is covered in elk antlers, all pointing the same direction. Then I hear the whistling, the SAR signal. But now it's behind me, getting closer. I wake up before it touches me, every time. I tried to convince myself it was PTSD, that I'd spent too long alone in those woods and now my brain was just echoing the fear. I'd seen too much in my career, lost hikers, bodies in snow caves, broken climbers who never made it off the summit. Maybe the sound was grief. Maybe it was guilt. But then my body started changing. At first, it was small things. My fingernails would thrum slightly when I touched metal. My vision would blur when standing near electrical equipment. And then my hearing, it got better. Too much better. I could hear the power lines buzz a block away. I could hear my neighbor's old clock ticking through the wall. And worse, when I went outside during a calm day, I could hear the mountain. Not loud, but present. A constant, buried tone in the earth's rhythm. Always northwest. Always calling. One night, I cracked and called a man named Clint O'Hara, a geophysicist I'd once helped evacuate during a landslide up near Hozomeen. He owed me a favor, and I cashed it in. I told him about the hum, about how it affected the animals, the people, the land. I expected him to laugh. But he didn't. He was quiet, too quiet. Then he said, "We've been picking up strange infrasound readings in the Cascades for years. Under the glaciers, it doesn't match tectonic movement." I asked what it did match. He didn't answer right away. "Resonance," he said eventually. "Not seismic, harmonic, like something's building up pressure under there or trying to communicate." I asked, "What kind of thing does that?" He just said, "Nothing natural." That's when I started driving again. Not running, but tracing the frequency. It wasn't logical, but something inside me needed to know. I drove down through Oregon, then looped back up the east side of the range, camping in remote sites, scanning the silence for the hum, and every night it got louder. By the end of the second week, I couldn't sleep more than an hour at a time. My body would seize up like I was being shocked awake. My hair began to thin. My skin turned pale, almost translucent under fluorescent lights. I started wearing sunglasses even on cloudy days because everything was too bright. And then the elk came again. I was parked off Highway 542 near Mount Baker, just a clearing with a pullout and some old stumps. I'd been camped there 2 days, ignoring the urge to go higher, trying to hold on to whatever fragments of myself were left. And that's when I saw them. 4 elk, standing at the edge of my sight. Their eyes were wide, unblinking, all staring directly at me, not in fear, in expectation. The smallest of them stepped forward. Its mouth opened, and the hum poured out. Not a growl, not a cry, the exact same low-frequency tone that had haunted me since Colonial Creek, coming from the elk. I nearly collapsed. My chest locked, my eardrums buzzed, my vision smeared like oil across glass, and then, just as I thought I might lose consciousness, it stopped, and they walked away, calm, deliberate, back toward the mountain. I sat in my RV, shivering, not from cold, from pressure, like something had crawled through the air and into my blood. I couldn't deny it anymore. The sound wasn't random. It wasn't geological. It was intentional, and it was trying to speak through things. Animals, machines, even people. That night, I got out an old field journal, the same one I used to keep during rescues, documenting terrain, injuries, coordinates. I started a new entry. Not for a rescue, for a warning. I detailed every place I'd heard the sound, every animal that acted strange, every dead bird, every unnatural pause in the wind. Because I finally understood. The sound wasn't calling me. It was preparing me. And somewhere in those peaks, something was waking up. Something that doesn't use words. Something that doesn't knock on doors or announce itself with thunder. It hums. A signal. And it waits for those of us who can hear it to come home. I started avoiding mirrors after that night near Mount Baker. Not because I looked afraid, because I didn't. I looked calm. Too calm. As if whatever fear used to live in me had been drained and replaced with something quieter, something older. I'd stare into my own eyes and feel a detachment, like the part of me that should have panicked was no longer there. I wasn't empty. Exactly. Just repurposed. I tried to go back to normal life, parked the RV on a friend's property outside Wenatchee, spent 2 weeks pretending I was just a cranky retiree recovering from a hard patch. I split wood, I cooked eggs, I watched the sky, but I knew I hadn't left it behind. The sound, the vibration, the memory of the elk and the ranger who wasn't human. Then, one night, as I sat on the roof of the Winnebago drinking coffee and watching the moon rise, I felt it again. deep, subtle. Not from the north this time, but from beneath me. A steady pressure in the soles of my feet. A pulse. I climbed down, walked out to the center of the open field. The stars above were sharp as ice, the wind perfectly still. And then I heard a scream, except it wasn't made by lungs. It came from metal. The windmill by the barn twisted slowly, shrieking out a pitch that didn't match its movement. It was slower than the sound it made, like it was being forced to produce a frequency it wasn't designed to handle. I backed away. The windmill stopped spinning, and the scream echoed once more, deeper, longer. Something had followed me, or maybe it was never in the mountains. Maybe the mountains were just transmitters. I left the next morning, didn't say goodbye, didn't know what to explain. I headed south this time, toward places where the ground hadn't whispered to me before. Down through Oregon into Northern California. Stopped near Shasta for a while, thought maybe the volcanic range would block it. But the truth was, I could hear it even there. Faint, distant. It was everywhere now. In cell towers, in water pipes, in the nervous tension of birds that refused to land. And yet, no one else noticed. I watched campers sit around fires, laughing with beers in hand, unaware of how unnatural the silence between trees had become. Hikers still set out alone, unaware of the direction their compasses bent when they passed certain ridgelines. I saw a boy walking barefoot in a creek in Lawson one morning, happy, humming to himself, and I almost screamed because I could hear it answering him. A perfect harmonic match buried beneath the stones in the stream bed. He couldn't hear it, but it was there. It was always there now. By December, driven to the desert, I thought maybe if I got far enough away from the range, it would stop. The Mojave seemed lifeless enough to drown it out. It didn't. It changed. In the stillness of the dunes, the sound took on a new character. Not just a pulse anymore. It became a song, 4 notes, a repeating pattern that felt almost familiar. And when I heard it, something in me shifted. I remembered being in a rescue team years ago, hiking into the backcountry during a blizzard near Stehekin. We were tracking a missing teenager. His father had called in after 2 days of no contact. It was brutal terrain, snow, and silence. And then we heard it. A hum, a resonance. We followed it for hours, convinced it was an emergency beacon. But when we found the boy, he was barefoot in a snowdrift, smiling like he'd heard something beautiful. We chalked it up to hypothermia. He never spoke again. He just kept humming those 4 notes over and over in the hospital. And now, decades later, I heard them again, clear, purposeful, calling. That's when I knew it wasn't trying to hurt me, not in the way we think of harm. It was changing me. Every cell, every thought, like tuning a radio that only plays one song over and over until you forget anything else existed. And that terrified me more than death. I wasn't losing my life. I was losing my will. So I made a choice. I turned the RV around and drove straight back into the mountains, into the source. If it wanted me, it could have me, but it wouldn't take me on its terms. I'd look it in the eye. I camped again at Colonial Creek. Same spot, same fire pit. It had snowed since I was last there. The campground was empty, the road barely passable. I parked the RV beneath the same canopy of evergreens and waited. I didn't wait long. The hum came at midnight, not subtle this time, full-body resonance. It cracked ice along the riverbank and made the snow vibrate in thin rhythmic pulses like a drum beneath my feet. And then I saw them. Figures, moving through the trees, not elk, not human, tall, angular, walking with a kind of irregular grace, like something learning to use legs for the first time. Their silhouettes pulsed with faint light, almost like veins of bioelectricity running just under translucent skin. They didn't speak. They just stopped at the edge of my campsite and watched. I stepped out of the RV, barefoot, no coat, and I spoke the only words I could find. If you want me, I'm here. The humming stopped, and the silence that followed was worse, because in that silence I felt something inside me speak back, a wordless message, not with thoughts or pictures, with memory, but not my memory, theirs. A vast, cold recollection of time before trees, before stone, when the earth was soft and unshaped and something buried itself deep beneath it to sleep. And now, after eons of silence, it was waking. And those of us who could hear the sound, we weren't chosen. We were receivers, conduits. It wasn't calling us home. It was sending us outward. We were the signal now. I don't remember walking back into the RV. I don't remember falling asleep. But I remember waking up. The sky outside was a dull silver, the kind of pre-dawn light that makes everything feel suspended in time. I sat up slowly, head pounding, mouth dry, and heart silent. Not metaphorically, literally. No pounding, no racing. Just a steady, quiet rhythm like a metronome tuned to the hum, still vibrating faintly in the aluminum skin of my rig. Something had shifted in the night. I wasn't afraid anymore. Not because the danger was gone, but because the fear no longer belonged to me. It was like someone had borrowed it, peeled it off my skin, and folded it into a shape I couldn't recognize. I looked at my hands. They didn't shake, but they didn't feel like mine. Outside, the ground was marked, not footprints. Not tire tracks, lines, perfect concentric rings in the snow around the RV, etched as if burned by heat that left no ash. I stepped out and crouched down to touch one. The snow hadn't melted. It had reorganized, crystals restructured into a flat, polished pattern that gleamed in the weak light. And when I touched it, the hum came back. Not loud, not violent, just there, present, inside me. I should have screamed or run or done something human. Instead, I smiled. And I hated myself for it, because that smile wasn't mine either. I spent the day packing, but not to leave. I packed methodically: survival gear, a recorder, backup batteries, maps, satellite radio, water filter. I wasn't sure where I was going, but I knew it wasn't back to Spokane or Wenatchee or anywhere with traffic lights and grocery stores. I was going up into the higher ridge, beyond the trails I used to patrol, beyond where maps show elevation. I knew now what the sound wanted. It wasn't summoning just anyone. It was recalling its witnesses. People like me, people who spent their lives listening for distress calls, tracking cries in the wilderness, tuning themselves to survival frequencies. People who already knew how to follow a sound through impossible terrain. I left the next morning, didn't lock the RV, didn't leave a note. Just walked into the trees with my pack, the silence broken only by the crunch of frost under boots and the faint rhythmic echo pulsing somewhere just beneath my ribs. As I climbed, I saw the changes. Trees bent in unnatural arches, not broken but bowed, like they were leaning toward something sacred and ancient. Snow melted in strange patterns, spirals, latticework, woven shapes that looked organic but impossible. And then I saw her again, the ranger, or the thing that had worn her shape. She stood near a cliff edge facing east, her back to me, no tracks in the snow behind her, just the wind carving drifts around motionless boots. I stopped a dozen yards away. "You're not real," I said aloud, just to test my own voice. "You're a construct, a projection." She didn't turn, but I felt something in the air twist. The sound changed, became words, not spoken, but formed in my mind with the weight of undeniable truth. Not a projection, a version. I didn't understand at first, but the memory flooded in. A real ranger, missing, found years ago in a shallow ravine with no wounds and no signs of trauma. I'd helped carry her body. I remembered the look on her face, peaceful, smiling. Now I understood. Whatever this thing was, it didn't kill. It copied. It absorbed those who heard it and then reflected them back into the world. Messengers, repeaters. I felt sick. "You used us," I whispered. "You used me." And then, for the first time, she turned around. Her face wasn't mine, but I saw myself in it. Something in the cheekbones, the eyes, the way the lips didn't quite match the breath. She wasn't smiling anymore. She looked tired. And again, the words weren't spoken, but felt, not used, chosen. You carried us farther than we could reach alone. Behind her, I saw the cliff open, not physically, emotionally, like a rupture in perception itself. And from it, the hum poured freely. Not as a weapon. As a release, I fell to my knees, not in pain, in surrender, not to a force of evil, to a force of design. And suddenly, I understood. This thing beneath the Cascades, it wasn't a monster. It wasn't ancient in the way we measure time. It didn't come from above or below or between. It came from within. A resonance seated into the bones of the earth long before we stood upright, waiting, evolving, echoing until someone tuned in. It wasn't hunting. It was broadcasting, looking for frequencies that matched, minds that could carry it forward, expand the reach, and those minds were breaking. Not from pain, from clarity. I don't remember coming down the mountain. I only remember waking up in a hospital bed in Everett, dehydrated, frostbitten, mumbling about signals and snow spirals and a dead ranger who wasn't dead. They said a hunter found me on a roadside pullout, passed out beside a sleeping bag and a busted satellite phone. The doctors think it was exposure, the sheriff thinks it was a breakdown, but I know what it was. I was transmitting. Even now, as I write this, I feel it under the floorboards of this little motel. The hum, always just out of hearing, pressing, and I know soon it will want me again. Maybe not to climb, maybe not to speak, but to carry. And when it does, I'll go. Because the truth is, once you've heard the sound that lives in the Cascades, you never truly come back. You just wait until the silence ends and the signal begins again. And this time, I'll answer. Because I am not just Sam anymore. I am the next frequency, and I'm already transmitting. I didn't want to believe it at first, that certain places across this country, places we're drawn to for their stillness and natural beauty, were never meant for us to camp in. That there are slices of America, deep and wild and full of silence, where the earth hums with something ancient and hostile. But after what I've heard and what I've seen, I can't ignore it anymore. When you live life on the road, moving your RV from one corner of the map to another, you meet a lot of people, and they talk. Around fire rings and picnic tables, between hookups and highway fuel stops, they tell stories. Not the Instagram kind, not the dreamy boondocking or cozy camper van kind. The other kind, the kind they only share after a few drinks or in hushed tones over morning coffee. Stories you can't Google. Stories that leave their fingerprints behind on the backs of your arms, even long after the telling. Over time, I started collecting them. Not for clicks or views, just because I felt like someone had to remember. And it turns out, when you start listening, really listening, people give you more than stories. They give you warnings, coordinates, names of places scratched out on maps, campgrounds they swore they'd never return to. And not for reasons like sketchy neighbors or noisy generators. No, these were different. Off. Cursed, maybe. Forgotten by the rest of the world. So I started keeping a list. And then one night in Idaho, parked up along the Snake River, I decided to start reaching out. I posted in a few RV forums, a couple of overlanding groups. The post was simple. Have you ever camped somewhere that felt wrong, somewhere dangerous, but not in the usual way? DM me your story. The next morning, I had 38 messages. By the end of the week, over 300. I've taken a handful of those submissions, the ones that still keep me up at night, and I've pieced them into one journey, a kind of roadmap through the darkest corners of RV camping in America. These aren't stories for thrill seekers or paranormal junkies. These are caution signs. If you've ever camped alone, if you've ever left your windows cracked open at night, if you've ever dismissed a weird sound because you thought it was just an animal, you'll want to listen closely. It started with a couple named Sam and Rainey. They were in their early 50s, ex-military. They lived full-time in a fifth wheel they'd renovated themselves, pulling it behind a diesel Ford with bumper stickers from every state they'd passed through. Rainey was the one who sent the message. It was short, just a location. Frying Pan Road, outside of Basalt, Colorado. Don't go there in late October. I'd never heard of it. Looked like just another forest road on satellite view, twists up into the White River National Forest. Nothing fancy. No campground, just dispersed sites. But when I asked why, Rainey sent a voice memo. I'll never forget her voice. Gravelly, slow, like she was trying to push the words through something thick. She said they were boondocking in their usual style, off-grid, tucked into the aspens, no one around for miles. It was late in the season, and the last of the yellow leaves were falling like soft, papery snow. They parked near a stream and stayed 4 nights. On the 3rd night, Sam went out to relieve himself in the dark. He didn't come back for nearly 20 minutes. When he did, he looked different. Not scared exactly, but wrong. Offbeat. He didn't say much that night, just crawled into bed. Rainey thought maybe he'd had a dizzy spell, maybe the altitude was messing with him. But the next morning, he was gone. No note, no footsteps, just the truck keys sitting on the counter and all his shoes left by the door. She stayed 2 more days, frantically hiking, driving the forest roads, calling the sheriff's office, but it wasn't until the 4th night, right before dawn, that she finally saw him again. He was standing 30 yards from the camper, at the tree line, completely still, barefoot, wearing the same thermal shirt he'd gone out in that first night. But his face, she said it was too calm, like he wasn't even trying to look like Sam, just wearing his shape like a costume stretched too tight. She didn't even open the door, she just drove. Right through the soft shoulder of the forest road, branches scraped the sides of the 5th wheel, mirrors shattered. But she didn't stop until she hit basalt. She filed a report, of course. No one found Sam, not a trace. Search and rescue teams combed the area for weeks. They wrote it off as hypothermia, disorientation, classic missing hiker story. But Rainey told me something I can't shake. She said the night before he vanished, he'd come back into the camper and just stood in the kitchenette for a long time staring at the ceiling. And then he said, "You hear that?" She hadn't heard anything. He said, "It's like the trees are whispering." I almost stopped reading submissions after that one. Almost. But there was something about the pattern. That line, "the trees are whispering," it came up again. From a different story, a different forest. This time it was a guy named Colt from Flagstaff. He lived in a 1989 Winnebago Warrior, always kept a .45 under his mattress. Said he didn't believe in ghosts, just didn't trust people. Said the lonelier the land, the more dangerous it could be. But then he sent me a location, Yosemite, but not the valley, past Wawona. Dirt turnoff you can barely see if you're not looking for it. He called it Dead Camp. Said it didn't have a name on any map. Claimed he only found it because he'd followed a beat-up Class C that pulled off the road and vanished. Thought it might be a local spot, maybe an old logging trail. But when he got there, the clearing was already full of RVs. Not new ones, not even operational. All different makes and models. Airstreams, pop-ups, ancient Winnebagos, a few trailers with no wheels at all. Just rusted shells scattered like forgotten teeth around a fire pit that hadn't been used in years. There were no people, not one, no sound, no bugs, no wind. Colt said the air felt held, like it was pressing down, watching. He only stayed long enough to take one photo, which he deleted the next day after it corrupted every file on his phone. But before he left, he heard something, a voice. Not human, not entirely, but shaped like words. He said it was coming from one of the old RVs, and it said, "You parked in the wrong place. I know what you're thinking. A place full of decaying RVs deep in a national park, a voice echoing from an abandoned trailer. It sounds like the stuff of movies, right? But you haven't heard Colt talk. His voice was flat, not theatrical. It wasn't fear he spoke with. It was shame. The kind of shame a person carries when they've seen something they shouldn't have and left something behind. Because when Colt finally turned the key and backed his Winnebago out of that clearing, his headlights caught something, someone standing just beyond the ring of rusted campers. And not just standing, waving. Colt floored it. He didn't check his mirrors. He didn't stop until he crossed back into Wawona, where the street lamps glowed and the world felt real again. But here's the part that keeps me up. He told me, a week later, back in Arizona, he woke up to a soft tick, tick, tick against the side of his rig. He thought it was wind, or maybe a bird. But when he opened the door, there was a rusted hubcap, just leaning there. No note, no footprints, just that circular, ancient piece of steel, like a calling card. It wasn't his. The next story came from a woman named Lisette, 72 years old, been solo camping since the 60s, back when you could pull into a national forest, light a cigarette, and just park wherever you wanted for a week without anyone questioning it. Lisette didn't scare easy. She'd camped in bear country, flash flood zones, tornado alleys, had an old casita she pulled behind a Jeep Cherokee and a dog named Arrow who barked at anything strange. Arrow had never been wrong, but she told me he went dead silent the night she camped in the Ouachita Mountains in Arkansas. She said she only stopped there because she was tired. Didn't even plan to stay the night, but she saw a pull-through site along a quiet ridge, and something about the air, thick and still, made her want to rest her bones. Around 11 p.m., Arrow growled once, a low, unsure sound, then nothing. Lisette stepped outside with her flashlight, just in case it was a raccoon. The beam caught nothing but trees, shimmering fog, and the faintest glint of a trail marker half buried in the dirt. She said the weird thing was how new it looked, like someone had just placed it there. Bright red, unweathered. She walked over to it, squinting to read the numbers stamped in. X17. Nothing else. No sign. No trail. Then came the smell. She said it was like rotting fruit in plastic, sweet and acrid, sharp enough to make her eyes water. When she turned back toward her trailer, she thought she saw someone moving inside. Just a shadow, low to the ground, crawling across the dinette. Arrow didn't bark. He just stared. Lisette didn't run. She walked slowly, kept her hands visible, told herself maybe it was a trick of the light, maybe a branch had moved, or the fog was playing games. But when she opened the trailer door, the place was empty. Except her curtains had been tied in knots, tight, neat, one in every window, every knot the same. She drove all night until she reached a Love's gas station, parked between two semis, and curled up with a knife in one hand, an Arrow pressed against her ribs. When she told me the story, she wasn't trying to scare me. She just wanted to know, have you ever heard of X17? I hadn't. But then a week later, another message came in. Different state, different person, same number. His name was Devin, 29. Traveling alone in a Sprinter van, he converted himself after getting laid off during the pandemic. Said he was doing the nomad thing, checking out national forests, avoiding tourist traps. He didn't scare easy either. But when he messaged me, it wasn't to tell a story. It was to ask if I'd ever heard of a campground where the numbered posts don't match any official records. He said he found one in the Gifford Pinchot Forest in Washington. It looked like a real campground, fire pits, posts, pull-in sites, but there were no people, no sounds, no trash, not even leaves on the ground, almost too clean. He parked at a site labeled X17, didn't think anything of it. Cooked some rice and beans, cracked a beer, sat under the awning with his feet up. Then the wind stopped. He didn't even realize it at first, just noticed how quiet the trees were, how still the smoke from his fire had become, just rising like a pillar instead of drifting. That's when he noticed the sign again. It wasn't wooden like the others. It was metal, welded, seamless, like it had been pressed from a machine. When he walked over to examine it, he saw a reflection, not his, but a blurred, reversed version of himself, as if the sign was slightly mirrored. Not fully. Just enough to catch a shape, except the shape blinked. He left immediately. Didn't even finish packing. Just drove until he hit cell service and sent me a picture. I'll never forget it. The sign wasn't red anymore. It was black. Same number, X17. He didn't ask me what it meant. He just said, tell people. Tell them if they see that number, don't stop. Sometimes I think about how easy it is to miss the signs. We're so eager to get out into the wild, to break from cities and strip malls, that we forget what silence really feels like. We forget that not all empty places are safe. Some are just waiting. Some campgrounds were never meant to be found. And some stories, they come with a price. I've got more to tell you, but first I need to warn you about Texas. What happened in Texas still makes my hands shake when I drive past certain rest stops. Because the next submission I got, it wasn't a story. It was a recording, a voicemail, 12 minutes long. The only thing they said at the end was, "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to open it." And then dead air. I listened to that voicemail a dozen times before I let anyone else hear it. 12 minutes. That's all it was. No name, no return number. Just a standard caller ID from a rural part of West Texas, somewhere outside Marfa. It started with breathing, shaky, uneven, and footsteps. Gravel crunching under what sounded like bare feet. Then a whisper, almost too low to catch. "It's under the van." I played that part back so many times it burned into my head. It's under the van, and the way they said it, it wasn't fear, it was awe. Like someone who had just seen something beyond comprehension. Something sacred. Or damned. The rest of the voicemail was chaos, wind, static. Something scraping metal, something crying, not human. And then about 8 minutes in, a voice that didn't belong to the caller. It came from far away, or maybe inside the van. Or inside the phone, it said, "You called me here." I can't describe the way it felt to hear that. I sat in my RV, parked on the edge of a KOA in Missouri, and I remember reaching for the switch to kill the breaker just in case something heard it too. The last few seconds of the recording were quiet again. No more static, no more breathing, just the distant sound of a metal door slamming shut, and then one final word, "Stay." After that, I started researching. Not ghost stories, not legends. I dug into missing persons reports, emergency calls from RVers, and you wouldn't believe what's out there, buried in small-town police logs, mostly brushed off or mislabeled as domestic disputes, drug trips, weather-related incidents. But patterns started to emerge, particularly along Highway 90 in Texas, somewhere between Dryden and Marathon. That stretch of desert, empty and brutal, has a history. They say back in the 60s, a convoy of Airstreams went missing out there during a solar flare. A group of retirees on their way to Big Bend National Park. 6 rigs, all traveling together, gone. Authorities chalked it up to cartel activity, even though no tracks were ever found. No signs of a struggle, just a note found in the sand near a wheel track that read, "We opened it." The story was never picked up outside of local news. Too bizarre. No real evidence. But when I cross-checked the coordinates from that old news clipping with the voicemail metadata, same spot. I don't think it's just bad luck out there. I think something waits. And when you park in the wrong place, or stay too long, or speak the wrong thing out loud, it listens. There's another place I need to tell you about. Different kind of danger. More subtle, more human, but no less terrifying. This one came from a couple out of Oregon, Elise and Jonah. They were doing a 3-month road trip down through Nevada and Utah, chasing national parks and staying mostly off-grid. They weren't new to camping. They had a 24-foot Class C with solar, Starlink, all the gear. Smart, prepared people. They were parked in a remote BLM site near Cathedral Gorge, Nevada. No other rigs for miles, just open desert and towering sandstone formations like ancient bones rising out of the earth. The first night was peaceful. Stars, coyotes in the distance, that kind of stillness that makes you feel small in a good way. But on the second night, around 3 a.m., they both woke up to tapping. Not on the door, on the windows. All of them, soft, deliberate, tap, tap, tap. Then a pause, then again from a different side. They turned on the exterior lights. Nothing. Jonah stepped out with a flashlight and a crowbar. Circled the rig twice. No footprints. No animals. Not even wind. They thought maybe it was thermal expansion. Metal popping from the day's heat. But they'd camped in hotter places and never heard anything like it. The next morning, Elise found something behind the rig. It was a rabbit skull. Clean. Bleached white. Placed upright. Right beneath the spare tire mount. They decided to leave that day, packed up fast. But when they stopped for gas in Pioche, Jonah checked the propane cover and found 6 more skulls, tied together with fishing line, hung inside the compartment like a charm. The gas station attendant saw them and went pale. He just muttered, "They marked you." Wouldn't say more. They drove straight through to Arizona after that, slept in a Walmart parking lot with all the lights on. Elise told me later she still has dreams where someone's tapping on her window, But when she wakes up, it's from inside the RV. And Jonah? He keeps the fishing line skulls in a shoebox beneath their bed. Says he wants to know where they are, just in case they ever come back. I used to think horror on the road meant something big. A bear crashing through your door, a freak storm, a drunk neighbor in the site next to you screaming at 2 a.m. But the stories I've heard, what people have lived through, they're different, more precise, more insidious. It's the smell of something sweet when it shouldn't be, the sound of a knock when you're miles from anyone, the gut feeling that something in the trees is watching, not just watching, but waiting for you to turn your back. We trust the open road too much sometimes. We think the worst that can happen is a flat tire or a broken fridge. But what about the places that never wanted us there to begin with? What about the land that doesn't care if you have signal or solar or a backup generator? What if some places remember things? Old things. And what if, when we roll in with our generators and our vinyl awnings and our Bluetooth speakers, we're not visitors, we're trespassers. And some places don't forgive trespassers. You can tell when you've overstayed your welcome, not in a campground, but in the land itself. The signs aren't always obvious. Sometimes it's a change in the wind. Sometimes it's a sound that shouldn't be there, like footsteps on gravel that isn't yours. Other times it's just a feeling, a weight pressing down on your lungs, like the forest is holding its breath and it's waiting to see what you'll do next. That's what happened to Jay. Solo traveler, 31. He drove a beat-up Chinook, old enough to be charming, barely road legal, said he liked to camp in the weird spots, the forgotten ones. The places Google Maps just shows green with no label. He messaged me from New Mexico, near Carson National Forest. There was an old mining road he'd followed deep into the hills, a place that didn't show up on any BLM maps. No signs, no gates, just a long, narrow trail that dropped into a basin so quiet it felt like sound didn't exist there. Jay was used to isolation, loved it even. But that night, something felt different. It started when he heard a baby crying, faint, distant, echoing off the rocks. He sat up in bed, froze, listened. There it was again, a soft, rhythmic cry coming from somewhere in the darkness beyond his campfire's glow. He said it didn't make sense. No cars, no other campers, no towns for miles. And it wasn't the sound itself that scared him. It was the way it moved. One moment behind the van, then to the left, then above, as if the sound wasn't traveling, as if it was circling. Jay did what any of us might do. He tried to be rational, told himself it could be a mountain lion mimicking a baby's cry. They do that sometimes, you know? But he couldn't shake the way the noise had no real source. Just presence. He locked the doors, pulled the blackout shades, put on headphones and tried to drown it out. But just as he started to doze off, the van shifted, not from wind, not from him moving, from weight. Something pressed down on the roof. Then the rear bumper groaned, like several someones had climbed aboard and were testing the frame. Jay didn't breathe, didn't even blink. He just waited. The metal creaked. The cry started again, but this time it was inside the van, right behind the bathroom door. He grabbed a crowbar and flung the door open. Nothing. Just silence. And then the engine started, by itself. Jay said the keys were still on the counter. He left that night without even putting on shoes. Ran through the dark until his flashlight died, then kept running. It took him until dawn to find the road again. He flagged down a rancher who thought he was strung out on something. But when they returned with a tow truck, the Chinook was gone. No tire marks, no broken brush, just that dry, perfect clearing, empty, undisturbed. The only thing they found was Jay's hat hanging on a broken fence post, and on the side of the post, scratched in with something sharp, were the words, "Don't follow the crying." When I first started collecting these stories, I didn't know what to do with them. I thought maybe I'd write a book or make a video, maybe just get them out of my head. But something changed after I heard from Hazel. She was in her 60s, widow, traveled alone in a little teardrop trailer that looked like it was made in the 50s, but had more heart and soul than half the RVs I'd seen. Hazel was tough, kind, no nonsense. The kind of person who's seen too much and isn't interested in exaggeration. She camped in the Appalachian Mountains, a spot she'd visited for years without issue. Quiet, hidden, safe. Until last fall. She told me it started with a sound in the trees. Not the usual rustle, not wind. It was laughter, soft, guttural, deep, too low to be human, too breathy to be an animal. She ignored it the first night, kept her lights on, closed the curtains, said her prayers. But the next day, her campsite was different. Not disturbed, not trashed, just rearranged. The firewood she'd stacked neatly, it was placed in a ring around the trailer, standing upright like little soldiers. Her camp chair, hung from a tree branch 20 feet up, folded perfectly. And all her utensils, forks, spoons, even her knife, were stuck in the dirt, pointing toward the trailer. She left immediately, didn't even hitch up the trailer. Just drove the Jeep into town and came back with 2 deputies. By the time they returned, the trailer was gone. But something else had been left behind. A circle of firewood, and a single word carved into the dirt in perfect serif letters. Stay. Hazel didn't cry when she told me the story, but when I asked her what she thought it meant, she said something that chilled me. I think it wasn't a warning, she said. I think it was an invitation. So why am I telling you this? Not to scare you away from the road, not to make you paranoid about a bump in the night or shadow in the trees. I'm telling you because we forget. We forget this land was never ours. That before the campgrounds and fire rings and picnic tables, there were older things here. Things that don't care about our maps or rules or comforts. Things that don't leave digital footprints. The most dangerous RV campsites in America aren't on a list. They're the ones you stumble into thinking you found solitude. They're the places where nature doesn't just feel quiet, it feels watchful, where you hear things that can't exist and see things that aren't meant to be seen, and leave with less of yourself than you arrived with. You might never tell anyone what happened. You might not even remember it right, but your rig will, your dog will, the air will, and if you're not careful, the land might remember you too. I didn't set out to become a collector of warnings. But somewhere between the Utah desert and the Northwoods of Michigan, I realized these weren't just stories. They were coordinates, markers, each one a flare shot into the sky by someone who saw something, lived through something, and needed the rest of us to know. I never forgot one submission that came with no name, no location, no preamble, just a time-stamped photo of a Class A motorhome parked beside a marsh, framed by a blood orange sunset, and a single line beneath it. It waited until we laughed. That was it. No follow-up, no contact, just that sentence. And somehow it said more than pages ever could. Because deep down, we all know laughter changes things. It cracks the silence, opens the space, makes us vulnerable. Laughter means trust, means peace, means we've let our guard down. And there are places in this country, empty, remote, silent places, where that's all something needs. Just a single moment of joy to know you don't expect to run. That's what happened to Tyler and Jess in Louisiana. Young couple, digital nomads, making their way east from Texas, stopping anywhere with enough cell reception for Zoom calls. They parked at a Corps of Engineers campground near Catahoula Lake. Small, forgotten, tucked into a pine grove that hadn't seen campers in weeks. At first they loved it. No traffic, clean air, stars like glass overhead. They cooked dinner over the fire, played cards in the screen tent, even made s'mores. Jess said it was the first time they'd really laughed in weeks. A real laugh. One that bubbles up and spills out because everything just for a second feels okay. But just after midnight, they heard footsteps. Not on gravel. Not through leaves. In water. Slow. Deliberate. Like someone dragging boots through the shallow edge of the lake just beyond where their firelight faded. Tyler went out with a flashlight, shined it across the reeds. Nothing, but the sound kept going, right to the edge of camp, and then stopped. The next morning they found prints, not shoe prints, not barefoot, something in between, wide, flat, webbed, but with drag marks behind each one as if claws had been drawn through the mud. They packed up in silence. 3 days later, I got a voice memo from Jess. She sounded calm, too calm. She said, "I think whatever it was didn't want us at the lake, but I also think it didn't want to hurt us." Then she paused. Then she said, "I think it just wanted us to stop laughing." There's something deeply American about chasing wide open spaces, about trusting the road to lead you somewhere better. We pack our rigs, our families, our fears, and we head toward the horizon because we believe that freedom is always found where the cell bars fade and the forest thickens. But freedom isn't free. And out here on the far edges of the map, there are things that remember when this land was untouched, unspoken for, unseen. We've carved paths into them, nailed up campground signs and paved fire lanes, and ran plumbing into ground that never asked for it. And some places, they push back. Sometimes with silence. Sometimes with sound, sometimes with loss. I've been through enough of these stories now to recognize the signs. And I want you to know them too. If you ever hear a voice outside your RV that sounds like someone you know, don't answer. If the same number appears on multiple campsite posts in different states, leave. If the forest feels too still, not like calm, but like a pause, like something waiting, trust your gut and go. If you smell something sweet when the air should be clean, get in your rig, lock the doors, and drive. And if your dog won't leave the trailer, don't make him. They see things we can't. They know. You might think these are just stories, campfire tales, a way to scare newbies and entertain the lonely. But I've stood in these places. I've parked on that red soil. I've seen tree branches bent in impossible shapes. I've watched fog roll in without moisture, without wind, without sound. I've heard things scratch the underside of my van that no mechanic could explain. And I've looked into the eyes of people who left pieces of themselves behind at campsites they won't talk about, even now. We all want escape. We all want silence. But some silence doesn't want you back. And some places will take whatever you give them. Your comfort, your sanity, sometimes even your name. There's one last story I need to tell you. It came from a ranger. A real one, worked for the Park Service in Alaska, didn't give his name, just said he'd been doing cleanup for 15 years. He told me there's a file, unofficial, a shared log between rangers at certain parks, mostly the big ones, mostly the ones with too much land and not enough staff. They call it the dark binder. Inside are notes, handwritten accounts, sightings, patterns, RV plates that keep showing up in parks after the drivers are reported missing. Campgrounds that close for the season even when the weather's fine. Unmarked sites that move. Yes, move. One ranger swore that a site numbered 47 in Yosemite appeared 3 miles from where it had been listed the week before. Another ranger tried to go back and find it, said it was just gone. The binder doesn't travel digitally, only by hand. Rangers mail it to each other. Never scan it, never copy it. When I asked why, the man just said, "We don't want it to follow." I asked him what he meant. He said, "There are places in this country that aren't just remote. They're feral. You don't camp in them. You survive them, and if you're lucky, you forget them." Then he paused and said, "Don't ever camp twice in a place that doesn't show up on your GPS." I wish I could wrap all of this up in something clean, something hopeful, a bow-tied moral about being cautious and prepared, triple-checking your weather app, keeping your tank topped off, choosing public sites with working restrooms and friendly hosts. But that's not what this story is. Because the truth is, no amount of caution can prepare you for the wrong place. You'll know it only once you're inside it. Once you've parked, once you've cooked your dinner and watched the fire die and shut off the exterior lights, and then something will shift. The air will tilt. The shadows won't behave like they should. Your dog will tuck its tail. Your trailer will creak, not because it's cooling down, but because something is pressing on it. And in that moment, you'll feel it. The stillness, not peace, the other kind, the kind that's watching, the kind that isn't yours. I was parked in Idaho when it finally happened to me, a tiny site near the Selway River. Hadn't seen another soul in 2 days. Thick pines all around. It was the kind of quiet I used to crave. But that night, the silence wasn't comfort. It was a vacuum. No owls, no wind, not even the river. And right as I was getting ready to climb into bed, I saw a light, far off, deep between the trees. Not a lantern, not a campfire. It pulsed low and blue, unnatural. I thought maybe it was someone's headlamp. Maybe I wasn't alone after all. But it didn't move like a person. It didn't swing or sway. It hovered, and it blinked 3 times, then paused, like a pattern. I stood there, barefoot, outside my van, watching it. And then I realized it was watching me, too. I could feel it. A pressure, like a thought that wasn't mine, had entered the space between my ears. And then came the sound. A long, low tone. Not loud, just constant. Like a tuning fork inside my chest. That's when I ran. Left the fire pit smoldering, left my chair, left the screen door swinging open behind me. Drove that sprinter down a winding forest road with the pedal pressed flat until I hit the nearest truck stop. I didn't stop to check the mirrors. I didn't stop to breathe. I've camped hundreds of nights before and since, but I've never gone back. Not to Idaho, not to that stretch of river. And I don't look for lights in the trees anymore. If you take anything from this story, let it be this. The danger isn't just in the weather or the wildlife or the terrain. It's not the bears or the brake failures or the sudden storms. It's in the invitations, the feeling that you're the only one who's ever parked in that spot, that the silence around you is yours to claim, that you can unzip the tent, crack open the beer, and forget the world exists. Because the land remembers, and the land, when it wants to, will invite you in with stillness, with warmth, with beauty. And if you laugh, if you stay too long, if you forget to respect the hush, it'll show you why no one else camps there anymore. I used to think stories like these were rare. They're not. I've got hundreds of messages in my inbox, more than I'll ever be able to read aloud. More voices than I expected, some calm, some broken, some already half lost. People who saw lights, people who followed sounds, people who camped next to trailers that shouldn't have been there, people who walked trails that didn't exist on any map the next morning, people who survived, and people who didn't. So now I drive differently. I don't follow side roads that feel too quiet. I avoid sites with no insects. I trust the dog. I trust the birds. I trust the wind. If I pull into a campground and feel my stomach tighten for no reason, I leave. Even if I drove 8 hours to get there, even if I already paid the fee, even if the view is perfect, because sometimes the view is bait. And sometimes the most dangerous place to camp is the one that looks like it's been waiting just for you. And to those of you listening, those who've parked in these places and lived to talk about it, don't let yourself forget. Don't let the silence convince you it was nothing. And if you ever hear a sound in the night that doesn't belong, do not open the door, no matter what it says, no matter who it sounds like. Lock the doors, shut the shades, turn the key, drive. Because you might think the road is yours, but out there, beyond the edge of the map, you're just another story waiting to be told. I've spent most of my adult life in a Volkswagen Westphalia, chasing the edges of maps that others only dream about. There's a certain kind of peace in pulling off the road in the middle of nowhere, flipping the top up, and letting the crickets sing you to sleep while the night wraps around the van like a wool blanket. That's what I tell people. That's the version I put on Instagram. But peace is a fragile thing. And sometimes when you go looking for stillness, you find something else waiting out there. Something older. Something watching. We set out that spring with no plan except to make a video. Something wholesome. Something simple. A guide to the most peaceful, scenic, and safe VW camping spots across the country. No horror, no drama, just good vibes and better views. That was the goal. I was traveling with Lena, my girlfriend of 3 years, and Milo, our mutt who thinks he's bigger than he is. Lena's a documentary editor who can smell a lie in a voiceover from a mile away. I'm more of a drifter. I take the footage, I write the words, and I try to make sense of it all. We'd both lived out of the VW for long stretches before, but this trip was different. It felt like a chance to tell a different story, One without ghosts, without legends, without the creepy whispers that seemed to follow us from site to site when we chased the weird stuff. We started in Utah, Zion, then over to Escalante. The sandstone glowed like fire in the afternoon, and each night we'd camp under sky so wide it made your chest hurt. Places like Lava Point and Kodachrome Basin gave us everything we'd hoped for: quiet, beauty, and no strange knocks in the dark. But that calm, it made us greedy. We got it in our heads to find the perfect spot, somewhere no one else had really documented, somewhere that still felt secret. And that's how we found Fox Hollow. It didn't show up on the big camping apps. It wasn't in any of the national park brochures or the crowdsourced hidden gem lists online. We stumbled on it when talking to a ranger near Bryce Canyon. He'd noticed the Westie and asked about our route. When we told him we were after peaceful, untouched campsites, no weirdness this time, I remember saying, he looked over his shoulder and said, "Try Fox Hollow, Old Fire Road west of Panguitch. You'll know it by the broken cattle gate. Folks say it's so quiet it'll shut your brain off." We should have asked why no one talks about it. The first strange thing was the way Milo reacted. The moment we turned off the highway and hit the gravel road, he started whining. Nothing major, just little restless sounds in the back seat. I figured he needed to pee, but when we stopped to let him out, he just stood there with his nose in the air, hackles raised, staring into the trees. His tail never wagged. Not once. "Coyotes," Lena said, always the rational one. "He probably smells them. Or elk." But I'd never seen Milo do that, not in 3 years of traveling. Not once. The gate the ranger had mentioned wasn't just broken. It was hanging off one hinge, twisted like something had hit it at high speed. A faded wooden sign beside it read, "Fox Hollow Access. No maintenance beyond this point." Most of the letters had peeled off, but enough remained to give us the name. The road past it narrowed, winding through thick pine and aspen stands, and the deeper we went, the less it felt like a place people still used. Wildflowers grew up through the tire ruts. Tree limbs arched low overhead like ribs in a cathedral. It felt too quiet. We found a small clearing about 2 miles in, flat, dry, ringed by tall trees, a perfect backcountry site. No other campers. No sounds of cars. No reception, of course. But that's what we wanted. That's what we were out there for. We parked the Westie so the back faced a slope leading down to a dry creek bed. Lena climbed up to the roof with her camera, chasing the golden hour light through the trees. I stayed below, unpacking the chairs and setting up the tiny table. Milo circled and sniffed the perimeter, tail low, never barking. He never went far, just paced and sniffed, paced and sniffed. The air smelled clean but sharp too, like minerals and dry stone. I noticed it most when the sun dipped below the horizon. A sudden chill hit the air, and with it came that smell again, stronger now, almost metallic. It stung the inside of my nose. "You smell that?" I asked Lena. She frowned, still filming. "What, like ozone?" I nodded. That was close enough. It smelled like something electrical, something burning, but not from fire. Milo came and pressed against my leg then, tail tucked so tight it curled under his belly. He was shaking. That night was the first time I heard it. At first, I thought it was just part of a dream, one of those sounds your brain adds into the story it's telling you in your sleep. But it didn't stop. It was this soft, pulsing sound, almost like a low humming, but broken. Staggered, like something trying to mimic a frequency but getting it slightly wrong. I opened my eyes. Pitch black. No moon that night. Lena was curled beside me under the blanket, steady breathing. I sat up slowly and listened. There it was again. Not a hum exactly, more like a groan, like wood bending under pressure. I slid the curtain open, expecting to see a fallen tree or maybe a branch caught in the wind. Nothing. No movement outside. The trees were still. The air was dead calm. But then Milo whimpered low, deep in his throat. He was under the table at the foot of the bed, pressed so tight against the floor I could barely see him in the dark. His ears were back, his eyes locked onto the back window. That's when I noticed something else. The van was tilted, slightly, but not the way it tilts on uneven ground. This was a shift, like the back end had sunk a few inches lower than before. I leaned forward and tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, just a trick of the light or my sleep-hazed brain. But when I opened the rear hatch and stepped barefoot into the night, I felt the shift immediately. The back left tire had sunken into the soil. Not much, maybe an inch or two, but enough to notice. Only the soil hadn't looked soft. It hadn't rained in weeks. I knelt down and ran my hand along the earth. Dry, cold, still. But then I heard it again, that groaning. But closer now, not from the woods, from beneath the van. I froze. Every part of me just stopped moving. I stared at the shadows under the Westie, willing my eyes to see nothing. To prove it was just some shifting suspension or the metal frame cooling and groaning like they sometimes do. But then Milo started growling, not barking, just a low, steady growl like I'd never heard from him before. And in that moment, alone, barefoot, crouched by a van on the edge of nowhere, I knew that something was wrong. Really wrong. And that whatever peace we thought we were chasing out here, it didn't belong to us. Not anymore. I didn't move, not at first. Something about that sound, it pinned me in place. It was low, not loud, but it felt wrong, like it wasn't meant to be heard, like the earth itself was trying to clear its throat. A deep vibration, buried just under the limit of human hearing, but enough to twist in your gut and make your skin prickle. I stepped back, slowly, eyes never leaving the shadow under the Westie. No wind, no animals, even the usual forest hum, those little nighttime sounds you never really notice until they're gone, had vanished. No insects, no rustling, just silence and that awful low groan from below. I crawled back into the van, locked the hatch, and sat there for a while with my back against the bed, heart thumping loud in my ears. I didn't want to wake Lena. Not yet. I kept telling myself I was overreacting, that maybe the van had shifted because I parked too close to a gopher burrow or a tree root gave way, that the sound was just something natural, the forest settling, a rock, the van's undercarriage cooling. But Milo didn't stop growling for a long time. He didn't sleep, neither did I. By sunrise, the forest seemed normal again. The light cut through the trees like it always did. Sharp, gold, clean. Birds chirped. Squirrels rustled. Milo even wagged his tail when Lena got up and stretched. I almost convinced myself the night had been a weird dream. But then I stepped out again and saw the prints. Not animal prints. Not boot prints either. They looked unfinished. Like someone had pressed long, narrow hands into the soil and dragged them. Not fingers, just pressure points. 4 on each side. Like claws, but too far apart. Whatever made them had moved in a circle around the van, once clockwise, like once counterclockwise, and then it had stopped directly beneath where I'd been sleeping. "You're seeing things," Lena said, but her voice caught halfway through. "Probably a raccoon. Big one." But she didn't meet my eyes when she said it, and she didn't argue when I suggested we move to a new spot. We packed up faster than usual, but I didn't want to go back down the same road we came in on. Something about it felt worse in daylight, exposed. So we took the Northern Fire Road the GPS barely acknowledged, climbing uphill through a winding pass that hadn't been maintained in years. It was slow going, rocky, rutted. I had to stop a few times to move fallen branches, let the engine cool. Eventually, the trees thinned and we found ourselves on a ridgeline overlooking a massive alpine meadow. It was gorgeous. Green grass rolling for acres, cut with a wide blue stream. Snow still clung to the edges of the far hills, and the air smelled clean again. Not that metallic tang from before, just pine and dirt and spring. "This," Lena said, breathing deep, "this is what we were supposed to find." We parked the Westie at the edge of the meadow and set up camp again. No weird sounds, no claw marks, no broken trees. It felt like a reset. Like we'd escaped whatever that first place had stirred up, until the sun dipped behind the ridge. That's when I noticed the black spot in the stream. I was filming B-roll of the water, trying to catch the light glinting across the surface, when something shifted in the current. A round shape, black, slow-moving. I thought maybe it was a rock at first or a submerged log, but it was drifting upstream. I zoomed in. It wasn't debris, it was a circle, perfect, dark, almost like a knot of shadow, moving against the current without creating ripples, just sliding silently through the water toward the bend where the trees were thickest. I looked up from the camera. Nothing there. The water looked normal again. I played the footage back. The shape was gone. Not even a distortion. Just 10 seconds of grass and water and nothing else. I didn't show it to Lena. Not yet. That night, I dreamt I was walking through the meadow alone, barefoot, my feet sinking slightly into soft soil with every step. The sky above was the color of ash, and something moved in the grass ahead of me, just out of reach. I couldn't see it, only hear it, the dragging sound. That groan again, but higher pitched now, like it was trying to speak. I woke to the sound of water, not running water, pouring, like someone had opened a spigot just outside the van. I slid the side door open. Everything was still. The stream glistened under moonlight, and the grass moved gently in the breeze. But there, 20 feet from the van, stood a figure. It was backlit by the moon, so I couldn't see its face. But it wasn't wearing clothes. It was thin, almost sickly looking. Long arms, slumped posture. I couldn't even tell if it was human at first. It didn't move. Just stood there with its head tilted slightly, like it was listening. I thought I was still dreaming. I stood frozen in the doorway, staring, waiting for it to blur or vanish. Then it took a step. The moment it moved, Milo lunged. He barked, wild and loud and desperate, crashing through the grass straight toward it. Lena woke up screaming behind me, asking what was going on, but I couldn't answer. I just jumped out after Milo, yelling his name, trying to see where he'd gone. But when I reached the spot, there was no one there. No figure, no Milo, just empty grass swaying in the moonlight. And then I heard it again, this time from beneath my feet, that deep, hollow groan. I dropped to my knees and pressed my palms to the ground, hoping to feel anything, movement, heat, tremors. But the earth was still, cold, too cold for spring. "Milo!" I shouted again, louder this time, my voice cracking. I turned in every direction, scanning the grass, the tree line, the curve of the creek. No rustling, no barking, nothing. Lena stumbled out of the van behind me, barefoot, eyes wide with sleep and fear. "What happened? Where's Milo?" "I saw something. I think it took him." The words didn't even feel real coming out of my mouth. I wanted to walk them back as soon as I said them. I wanted to believe he'd just chased a raccoon into the woods, that he'd come trotting back any minute like always. But he didn't, and I couldn't explain what I'd seen. We spent the next hour combing the meadow, calling his name. Flashlights in hand, voices raw. I even waded into the stream where I'd seen that dark shape earlier, convinced that maybe he'd fallen in chasing something. Nothing. Just smooth rocks and freezing water. By dawn, I collapsed onto the grass near the van and stared at the rising sun, shaking. Lena sat beside me in silence, knees pulled to her chest. She didn't ask me what I saw again, and I didn't try to explain it. We didn't talk much after that. There's a kind of grief that doesn't let itself be spoken. Not right away, not when it's mixed with terror and guilt and the weight of not knowing. We stayed there another night, part of me hoping Milo would come back, part of me too numb to make a decision. Lena hardly looked at me. She just sat in the van and stared out the window with that blank, distant look that says everything you don't want to admit out loud. That second night, I didn't sleep. I kept the flashlight in my lap and watched the meadow from the driver's seat, eyes twitching at every breeze, every flicker of movement. Just past 3 a.m., the air changed again, same as before, metallic, sharp, bitter. And then I heard it, from under the van. Not a groan this time, a whisper. It was low, broken, like an old cassette tape, warped and slowed down. But it wasn't speaking words. It was mimicking something, trying to imitate. And then I heard it say his name, not Milo, but something close, drawn out, misshapen. "Me-lo." I froze. Then I saw the grass move. It wasn't from wind. It was a straight line, parting slowly, starting from the far edge of the meadow and moving directly toward the van, as if something was slithering just beneath the surface. Silent. Intentional. I woke Lena. She didn't ask questions, just looked in my eyes, saw whatever was there, and nodded. We were in motion 5 minutes later, throwing gear into cabinets, slamming the roof shut, turning the ignition. The tires skidded on wet grass as we peeled out of that meadow, engine whining. Neither of us looked back. We drove for hours, didn't even bother finding another site, just found the nearest paved road and kept going. I didn't stop until we hit a gas station on the outskirts of Cedar City. There, in the harsh light of morning, surrounded by humming vending machines and the distant drone of trucks, the spell finally broke. It felt stupid to say it out loud, so I didn't. We told each other Milo had run off, that he'd smelled something and chased it, that it was just bad luck, bad timing. We agreed not to include that site in the video, not because it wasn't safe, not because of what happened, but because it didn't feel real. That's how you survive things like this. You rewrite them. But then 2 days later, at a campground in the Sierra Nevadas, I heard it again. That whisper. Not loud, not close, but just loud enough that I knew I hadn't imagined it. This time, it came from the trees above camp. I looked up and saw nothing, no birds, no movement. But I could feel it. Something waiting, watching. Lena didn't hear it, or said she didn't. We kept moving. North, Oregon, then Washington. Each time we stopped, I'd lie awake at night listening. The whisper didn't come every night, but it came enough. And every time it was a little clearer, a little more human. We never found Milo. I started checking missing pet boards, campground reports. I even filed something with the ranger station back in Utah, though I left out the parts about the whispering. They said they'd keep an eye out. They didn't ask questions. Weeks passed. Then, months. The video we were making? We never finished it, not the way we'd planned. Instead, we decided to tell a different kind of story, the one I'm telling you now, because the truth is, the best camping spots in the US, the ones you don't see on maps, the ones that feel untouched, wild, still, they are beautiful. But some of them are quiet for a reason. Some of them stay hidden because they're not meant to be found. Or maybe they were found a long time ago by something that never wanted to be disturbed. I still camp. I still travel. I still sleep in this old VW, even with everything that happened, because the road is still the only place I feel alive. But I don't chase silence anymore. And I don't go looking for the perfect campsite, because sometimes when you find it, it finds you back. I thought a lot about quitting the road after that trip, selling the Westie, going back to an apartment, a fixed address, neighbors close enough to hear you scream. I even started looking at rental listings in towns I barely remembered living in, places with mailboxes and noise and streetlights that never went out, but none of them felt right. It's strange, isn't it? How something can scare the breath out of you and still call you back like a song stuck in your bones. I started dreaming of the forest again. Not just that meadow, other places too. Trees pressed too tight, trails that vanished mid-step, water that moved against the wind. Always, there was the feeling that I was being watched, followed, even in the safety of my dreams. And always in the background, a soft voice whispering something that almost sounded like a name. But it wasn't just fear that kept me up at night. It was guilt. For leaving him. For not doing more. For pretending everything was normal just so I could sleep. I kept telling myself I'd done all I could. That Milo was just a dog. That dogs run. That he might have gotten picked up by another camper or wandered into a nearby town. That maybe if I kept looking at enough online reports, his face would pop up somewhere with a different collar and a different name but the same eyes. But the truth is, I knew better. Some part of me knows where he went, and some part of me knows it's not a place you can go and come back from. But you have to keep moving forward. That's the only way the road works. Eventually, Lena left. We didn't fight. We just stopped fitting together. Grief does that. Silence does that. She moved back east. Said she needed time away from the woods, from the road, from me. And I understood. So I stayed. I still travel alone now the way I did before I ever met her. Just me and the van and the road and the wind coming through the cracked window at night. I go slower now. I listen more. I check the ground before I park. I watch the trees longer before I step out. And every now and then I pass places that feel heavy. You can feel them through the tires, through the steering wheel. Like something under the soil is pressing up with a kind of hunger. Those places don't make the guidebooks. They don't have reviews, but they're real. And the people who've lived on this land longer than maps know it too. I met a Navajo man near Monument Valley once. Told him, vaguely, about what we'd seen. I left out most of it, but something in his eyes said he understood anyway. He nodded and said, "Some places remember what they were before us. And some places never forgot." I asked him what that meant. He just said, "Not everything that watches you wants to hurt you, but none of it wants to be seen." That stuck with me. It made me realize the problem wasn't just the place or the thing we heard. It was that we looked for it. We didn't listen when the land told us to go. We wanted the most untouched, the most sacred, the most silent spot on the map. And we found it. And it didn't want to be found. So now, when people ask me for the best VW camping spots in the US, I still tell them. I give them the real ones, the safe ones. The scenic, well-worn, honest-to-God beautiful places where you can park your van, pop the top, and sleep under the stars without feeling eyes in the trees. Places like the Oregon coast, where fog rolls in so thick you lose track of the line between sea and sky, but never your own breath. Or Glacier National Park, where the air is clean enough to make you cry, and the bears stay where they belong. Or the redwoods, where you feel small but not preyed upon, humbled but not hunted. There are still places like that. A lot of them, more than most people know. But the places I don't talk about, the ones that pull at the edge of your thoughts long after you've driven past, that's where the real danger lives. Not because of what you'll see there, but because of what you'll feel. The pause in the air, the cold in your blood, even when the sun's out, the silence that seems too perfect, the instinct to turn around, to leave. But you don't, because you think you're smarter, you think you're strong, you think you're safe inside your van. You're not. And that's not meant to scare you. It's meant to remind you. Camping, real camping, is not a game. It's a relationship with something older, deeper, and less interested in your comfort than you might believe. It's not about chasing perfection. It's about respecting the wild, knowing when to stay and when to leave. I didn't always know that, but I do now. And that's why I still camp. That's why I still drive these roads and park beneath the stars and breathe in the scent of pine at dusk and listen, really listen to the world around me. Because it's not about finding peace anymore. It's about finding truth. And sometimes that truth isn't quiet or easy or kind. Sometimes that truth claws its way out from beneath your van in the middle of the night and whispers a name you loved, and you don't get to forget it, but you do get to carry it. That's the gift. That's the lesson. And that's why I keep moving, because the road doesn't heal you. It just teaches you how to live with the things you've seen.